Alright folks, settle in. This story starts with a secret, one that's been buried for centuries, not in gold or treasure, but in plain old dirt. While the history books are filled with kings and castles and glorious battles, the real story of survival for millions of people happened in the quiet dark, 3 feet underground. This is the story of how the earth itself became a fortress. Before we dive down that hole, if you're into tales of forgotten ingenuity and raw human grit, make sure you're subscribed. This is a long journey, and you're going to want to catch every chapter. So, close your eyes for a second. Not really, because you need to read this, but you get the idea. Imagine the cold. Not your modern, I forgot my jacket cold. A deep, bone-aching, relentless cold that seeps into the stones of your house and the straw of your bed. The year is somewhere in the early 1300s. Europe is sliding into a chill that historians will later call the Little Ice Age. Winters are stretching longer, summers are failing, and up on the surface, life is a fragile, frozen thing. Your name is Agnes. You're 12 years old, and you wake up in the absolute black of a Bavarian winter morning. The kind of dark that feels solid. You don't see it. You feel it pressing against your eyelids. The fire died hours ago. Your father, Wolf, tried to keep it going, but exhaustion won, like it always does. Every breath you take hangs in the air as a tiny, useless cloud. The house is a single room of wattle and daub sticks, mud, dung, and hope. Right now, the wind is winning, whistling through gaps in the walls like it's laughing at you. You hear your mother, Edith, already moving. The soft, desperate scrape of flint on steel, trying to coax a spark back to life. Agnes. Her voice cuts through the dark. Come help. You don't want to. You want to curl tighter into your thin blanket, but you push yourself up. Your feet hit the floor, hard-packed, frozen earth. It's literally ice. This is your normal. The fire catches, a pathetic little flicker, but it paints your mother's face in jumping shadows. She looks exhausted, but there's a new tension there today. Your father wants to show you something, she whispers. Something important. Outside, the world is a silent, white grave. The village paths, usually bustling by now, are empty. Just fresh snow covering everything, making it look peaceful. It's a lie. This world is never peaceful. Your father is waiting, a mountain of wool and sheepskin. He just says, come. You follow him to the edge of the village, to a hillside covered in snow and a jumble of old stones that looks like a collapsed wall. Nothing special. Look carefully, he says. You see snow, dead grass, rocks. I don't see anything. He almost smiles. Almost. He kneels by the stones, brushes away snow, and reveals not rock, but a cleverly disguised wooden cover. He lifts it. There's a hole. Steps carved right into the earth, descending into blackness. This, your father says, his voice gone low and serious, is our earth house. Your grandfather built it, his father before him. Today you learn. He disappears into the ground. You hesitate at the mouth of the earth, every instinct screaming that this is wrong, that people belong in the light. But then you feel it. A breath of air rises from the opening. Not cold, warm. Not summer warm, but noticeably, miraculously warmer than the killing freeze above. You descend. The walls are smooth, worn by generations of hands. A small oil lamp flickers ahead, and then the passage opens up and you stop dead. It's a room, a real room carved from the earth itself. The ceiling is low, held up by thick wooden beams. The walls are smoothed clay, painted with simple shapes. A cross, a tree, small handprints pressed into the soft surface long ago. And the temperature, it's steady, maybe 50 degrees. After the surface, it feels like a sanctuary. How is all you can manage. The earth remembers warmth, your father says. 3 feet down, the ground doesn't care about winter. It holds steady. Your grandfather figured it out watching his cellar. The vegetables never froze, so he dug deeper. You look around. A sleeping platform with straw and furs. Niches in the walls holding pottery. A tunnel leading off into more darkness. There's more, your father says. 3 chambers. This one for living, another for food, and that passage connects to our neighbor Eric's place. In case we need to move without being seen. He has you feel the wall. It's cool, not cold. The texture is rough, clay mixed with straw. The straw keeps it from cracking, he explains. Took my father 3 winters to get it right. He points to the tunnel entrance. It angles down first, then up into here. Know why? Cold air sinks. Warm air rises. The cold gets trapped at the low point. The warmth stays with us. He looks at you, really looks. Your grandfather couldn't read a word, but he understood something the cathedral builders maybe didn't. He understood the earth. A rat scuttles in the tunnel shadows. Your father doesn't flinch. Rats we can handle. It's the other things we built this for. What other things? Men, he says simply. The word hangs in the air. Raiders, soldiers, bandits. The stories everyone whispers. Last winter, he continues, 43 of us lived down here for 11 days. We heard them pass overhead. Horses, wagons. They took what they could find from the empty village. Grain, chickens, your mother's best pot. He says this last part with a grim shadow of a smile. But they didn't find us, because we weren't there. We were here. He shows you marks on the wall, little lines grouped in 5s. A tally of those 11 days. That's why you're here, Agnes. Someday you'll need to know this. How to find it, how to survive in it, how to keep it working. Then, from far above, muffled by dirt and wood, a sound echoes down. Bong, bong, the village bell. It only rings for 2 reasons. Fire or trouble approaching. Your father's face changes in an instant. The lesson is over. Stay here, he barks, already moving for the steps. If I'm not back in 1 hour, get your mother and Oswin and come down. Use Eric's tunnel. And then he's gone, swallowed by the passage, climbing back toward the gray light and the echoing bell. You're alone, in the silent, earthy dark, with only the flickering lamp for company. You start counting your heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Somewhere above, you hear shouting. 114. 115. The numbers tick over in your head. A feeble rope to cling to in the pressing silence. The shouting from above hasn't stopped. It's changed. It's not the organized panic of a fire. It's sharper, raw with a fear that twists your stomach. The kind of noise people make when they're running. The single lamp flame dances, throwing wild, leaping shadows against the packed earth walls. They look like living things, like the monsters from your father's stories. But these are worse. These are shaped like men. You press yourself against the cold clay of the sleeping platform, fingers digging into the straw. The earthy smell of the chamber, usually a scent of safety, of cool stability, now smells like a grave. An hour. That's what he said. But how do you measure an hour when you're buried alive with your own terror? There's no sun crawling across the floor. No church bell marking the canonical hours. Just the dark, and the drumbeat of your own heart in your ears, and the distant, muffled chaos from the world you used to live in. You scan the chamber again. The wooden ladle in the niche is not a weapon. It's a joke, but it's all you have. You clutch it, the wood smooth from years of use. A tool for serving soup, now your only defense. The irony isn't lost on you, even now. Then footsteps, heavy, fast, stumbling down the entrance passage. Your breath catches. It's too soon for your father. It's only been minutes. The footsteps get closer, echoing in the narrow throat of the tunnel. This is it. They found the entrance. They're coming. You raise the ladle, your arms shaking. A pathetic last stand in a hole in the ground. Your mother's face appears in the lamplight, pale as milk, her eyes wide with a terror you've never seen. Behind her, your father, with your little brother Oswin clutched against his chest. The boy's face is buried in your father's neck. Move! Your father grunts, the word a sharp crack in the quiet. You scramble back without thinking. Behind them come more shapes, stumbling into the chamber. Old Gerd from 3 houses over, moving with a speed her frail body shouldn't possess. Then Henrik, the blacksmith's son, half carrying, half dragging his wife, Martha. She's huge with child, her face clenched in pain that has nothing to do with the raid. The widow Brunhild herds her 4 children like frightened chicks, the youngest wailing until she clamps a hand over his mouth. The chamber, which felt so spacious moments ago, is suddenly crammed. The air thickens with the smell of cold sweat, wet wool, and the sharp tang of pure panic. "Keep them quiet," your father hisses, his gaze locked on the entrance passage. He's listening, his whole body tense. "For the love of God, keep the children quiet." Your mother pulls you and Oswin into a tight huddle. You can feel her trembling. Your mother, who faces down starving winters and sick livestock without a flinch, is shaking. "What's happening?" You whisper into her shawl. She just shakes her head, her lips pressed into a thin white line. More villagers spill in. The chamber is a press of bodies now. You hear more movement from the other tunnels, Eric's family, the Muller boys, others, filling the connected spaces. Your father is the last. He pulls the entrance cover shut with a solid thud, and you hear the heavy scrape of a timber beam being dropped into brackets, barring it from the inside. In the sudden, sealed quiet, the only sounds are ragged breathing and the muffled sob of a child. Old Gerd's voice, surprisingly steady, cuts through. "How many, Wolf?" 20, maybe 30. Your father says, his voice low. "Armed, swords, axes, some on horseback." He pauses. "They have a wagon." A wagon. That single word lands heavier than the news of swords. A wagon means they're not just passing through. They came to strip the village bare. They came to take. "Did anyone see you come this way?" Henrik asks, his arm a protective bar around Martha. "I don't think so," your father says. "Most headed for the storehouse first. They'll be busy." As if on cue, a muffled crash reverberates through the earth above you. Distant but heavy. A door being kicked in. A wall coming down. Oswin whimpers. "Shoo!" Your mother murmurs, rocking him. "It's the quiet game, remember? The quiet game." Then you smell it. Smoke. Thin, acrid tendrils filtering down through invisible cracks in the earth above. It curls into the lamplight, a ghost of the destruction happening up there. "They're burning something," Henrik whispers, fury and despair twisting his voice. "The storehouse, probably." "What if they burn the whole village?" someone asks from the darkness. No one answers. The answer is obvious. You'll survive down here, yes. The fire can't reach you through 3 feet of packed earth. But when you come up, there'll be nothing. No houses, no barns, no food stores, just ash and a long, starving winter ahead. The smoke thickens. Martha coughs, a wet, choked sound she tries to swallow. Her husband pulls her closer, trying to shield her with his own body. "The air's better through the passage," your father says, his voice all business now, pushing back the fear. "The tunnel to Eric's. His entrance is on the other side of the hill." We move, slowly, quietly. "Everyone follow me." What follows is a slow, terrifying migration in the near dark. You keep one hand fisted in your mother's skirt, terrified of losing her in the press. The connecting passage is a schlupf, a slip passage, narrower than the main tunnels. You have to turn sideways, the cold, damp earth brushing your shoulders, your back. The ceiling dips, and for a terrifying 10 feet, you're on your hands and knees, crawling through absolute blackness. The sounds of 40 people breathing, shuffling, stifling cries echoing around you. You emerge into Eric's chamber. The smaller, is already full. Faces you know, pale and wide-eyed in the lamplight. The tanner, old Hans, who always smells of goats. More children. The air is cooler here, the smoke smell fainter. "It won't follow us," Eric rumbles. He's a bear of a man. The entrance slopes up before it goes down, like a chimney in reverse. Smoke rises out. "How long do we wait?" Brunhild asks, her toddler now silent but shivering. "Until they leave. And if they don't?" "They always leave," Eric says, but he doesn't sound convinced. Time becomes a strange, sticky thing. It stretches and pools. Minutes feel like hours. You sit wedged between your mother and a wall, feeling the carved handprints press into your back. The children, exhausted by fear, eventually sleep. The adults don't. You watch the faces around you in the flickering light. Henrik, staring at nothing, his hand resting on Martha's belly. Old Gerd, her eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer or memory. Your father and Eric, heads close together, talking in whispers you can't hear. You think about your house. Are they in it right now? There's so little to take. The grain, your father's tools, the herbs hanging from the rafters. The only thing of real value is your grandmother's small silver cross. You see your mother's hand drift to her chest, feeling the lump under her dress where it hangs. A reflex, making sure it's still there. Sometime later, an hour? 3. The sounds from above stop. The crashes, the shouts. They fade into an eerie, waiting silence. The smoke smell gradually dissipates, drawn away by the hidden air currents. Still, no one moves. Finally, Eric looks at your father. I'll go look. Not alone. Someone needs to stay with the families. Your father nods, reluctant. Eric moves toward his entrance tunnel, disappearing like a shadow. His absence is its own kind of terror. The wait is worse than before. Every second stretches out, filled with imagined sounds. The creak of the hidden door, a shout, a scream. When Eric finally returns, his face tells the story before he speaks. Gone, he says, headed south along the river road. I watched until they were specks. He takes a breath. The storehouse is ash. 2 houses on the north end are gone. The ones closest to the road. He looks around at the waiting faces. The church is still standing. The rest looks untouched. Your house is south of the church. Your father sags, just a little, the tension leaking out of him. We wait until full dark, he says. Then we go up a few at a time, quietly, in case they left a watcher. The final wait is the hardest. The immediate danger has passed, leaving behind a hollow, sick feeling. The relief you expected doesn't come. It's been scooped out and replaced with dread for what you'll find above. When the order finally comes to move, your legs are numb. You stumble in the passage. The night air that hits you when you emerge is painfully cold, achingly clean. It smells of snow and, faintly, of char. The stars are a dizzying, frozen spray across a black velvet sky. The moon is a sliver. You take your father's hand. Your mother takes the other. Oswin, awake now but solemnly quiet, rides on her hip. Together, a small knot of warmth in the vast cold, you walk back toward your village. The path is familiar, but the world it leads to is not. You smell it before you see it. The sour, wet stink of burned grain and timber. The storehouse is not damaged. It is gone. A black scar on the white snow still smoldering. 2 houses are skeletal, dark ribs against the night sky. But your house is standing. Your father approaches it like a man walking toward a sleeping wolf. He pushes the door open, disappears inside, emerges a minute later. They took the grain barrel, he says, his voice flat. The dried meat from the rafters, but the structure is sound. We can still live here. Your mother makes a sound, a half laugh, half sob, and sets Oswin down. She just stares at the dark shape of your home, her hands pressed to her mouth. Around you, other families are doing the same, emerging from the night, assessing the damage. Some cry, some are eerily silent. Old Hans is cursing with a steady, creative rhythm. His entire winter supply of dried fish is gone. But as you stand there, the freezing night slowly stealing the feeling from your toes, you look at the faces emerging from the shadows. Henrik helping Martha, Brunhild counting her children, old Gerd leaning on her stick. 43 people went into the ground. 43 people came back out. The raid stole your food. It stole your sense of safety. But it didn't get what it came for. It didn't get you. You look at your father. He meets your gaze across the moonlit snow and gives a single, slow nod. You understand. The hole in the ground, the secret, the inheritance of dirt and knowledge. It wasn't just a hiding place today. It was the thin, hard line between your story ending and your story continuing. And tomorrow, when the gray dawn lights the ashes, you will go back down into that earth with him. And you will begin to learn how to be a keeper of that line. Dawn came, gray and thin, and with it the full weight of what was lost. No one slept much. Your family huddled together under every blanket, every fur, a knot of shared warmth and silent dread. Every crack of settling wood from the burned ruins, every dog barking in the distance, jerked you awake, your heart hammering against your ribs. The raiders were gone, but the fear they planted had taken root. The village gathered in front of the church. It was the only building besides the storehouse big enough to hold everyone, and Father Bernard's face looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. They all did. Otto, the headman, a barrel-chested man with a voice that usually carried across fields, sounded hollow. "The storehouse is gone," he said, the words landing like stones. "That was 3/4 of our winter grain. The rest was in our homes. Some was taken, some remains." He looked at the 60 faces, young and old, all stamped with the same exhaustion. "We need to take stock. Every family, every barrel, every sack. Then we figure out how to make it last until spring." Your father stepped forward. The crowd's eyes shifted to him. "There's more food than you think," he said. Otto raised a bushy eyebrow. "Where?" "Underground." A murmur rippled through the villagers. Some people nodded, they knew. Others looked confused, even suspicious. Secrets, even life-saving ones, can breed resentment. "The storage chambers," your father continued. "Some families have been keeping provisions down there for years. It's cooler than any cellar. Things last longer." "How much are we talking about?" Otto asked, his voice all business now. Your father did a quick mental tally. "Between Eric's family and mine, probably enough grain for both families for 3 months. Plus root vegetables, dried meat, ale." The murmuring grew louder. You heard it, the sharp edge of anger. Why should they have 3 months of food when the Gruber family lost everything? Your father held up a hand. "I'm not saying we keep it for ourselves. I'm saying we pool it. Everything underground and above. Share it equally. But the underground stores, they need to be managed carefully. The temperature stays steady down there, but only if we don't disturb it too much. Open the entrance too often, let the warm air out, and we lose the advantage." Otto considered this, his practical farmer's mind turning it over. "Show me," he said finally, and that's how, less than an hour after sunrise, you found yourself back underground. This time, it wasn't your living chamber, but a place you'd never seen. Your father led Otto, Eric, and 2 other councilmen down a steeper, narrower passage that angled deep into the hillside. "This is the storage level," your father explained. "Deeper means more stable." He lit a torch, and the flickering light revealed a sight that stole your breath. Barrels, a dozen of them, maybe more, lined up along the curved earthen walls like silent soldiers. Each one was sealed with a thick layer of wax and clay. Your father tapped one with his knuckle. A solid thunk. "Wheat," he said. "Barley in the next 2. Oats after that. We rotate. Oldest first, newest to the back." Otto walked the line, his fingers trailing over the staves. You could see him calculating. Days of bread, weeks of porridge. "Over here," your father said, moving to a large rectangular pit filled with sand. He crouched and dug in with his bare hand, coming up with a carrot. It was firm, crisp, orange as if it had been pulled yesterday, not stored months ago. Carrots, parsnips, turnips, onions, kept in sand, separated. Stops rot from spreading. The cold down here keeps them from freezing, but not so cold they turn to mush. He moved to the walls where niches held ceramic pots. He popped a wax seal on one, and the smell hit you, rich, golden, sweet. "Honey. Never spoils," he said. "Worth more than silver some years." Another niche held smaller pots. "Herbs. Dried. Makes whatever you've got left taste like something." Then he pointed up. The ceiling was a forest of hanging food. Dozens of legs of pork, salt-cured until they were dark and hard. Strings of dried fish. Wrinkled sausages dangling from hooks driven right into the support beams. The smell was overpowering, salt, smoke, fermentation, age. It was the smell of foresight, the smell of beating hunger by outthinking it. We smoke the meat above ground first, your father explained. Then bring it down. No flies, no rot, just cold, dry air. Smart, Otto said, and he sounded genuinely impressed. My father figured most of it out by losing a whole season's pork 1 year, your father said with a grim chuckle. Dug the drainage channels after that. He pointed to the almost imperceptible slope of the floor, leading to a stone-lined sump in the corner. Water gets in, always does. If you don't guide it out, you're living in a swamp by spring. Otto had been quiet, taking it all in. Finally, he asked the question hanging over everyone. How many families have setups like this? 6 or 7 that I know of, your father said. Some bigger, some smaller. So between all of you, how much food are we talking, total? For all of us. The silence that followed was heavy. Your father's eyes met Eric's. Enough to keep maybe 30 people alive through the winter, he said slowly. If we're careful, if we ration. Otto didn't need to say it. There were 60 mouths in the village. 30 people's worth of food. The math was a death sentence. There's another option, Eric rumbled. He'd been quiet, letting your father do the talking. The forest. Otto frowned. The forest is the Lord's land. Poaching means your hand on the block. I'm not talking about hunting deer, Eric said. I'm talking about gathering. Nuts, roots, bark, lichen. There are plants that hold on through the snow if you know where to look. My grandmother knew them all. Taught my mother. My mother taught my wife. That's women's work, one of the other councilmen muttered. Eric turned on him, his big frame suddenly intimidating. Women's work might be what keeps your children's bellies from sticking to their spines. You want to tell me your pride is worth more than that? The man looked away. Otto held up a hand. We'll do both. We pull the underground stores. We send gathering parties into the forest. And we pray for an early spring. He looked at your father. Can you teach others? To build these? It takes time, your father said. More than we have before the hard freeze. But I can show them how to expand what they've got. At Chambers, it's easier to make a hole bigger than to dig a new one. Then that's what we'll do. The meeting broke up. People moved with a grim purpose. A plan, even a desperate one, was better than no plan. Your father stayed behind in the storage chamber after the others left. You stayed with him. The torch was burning low, making the shadows of the hanging meat dance across the walls. He walked to a section of wall covered in strange scratches. Lines, circles, crosses. This, he said, is how we keep track. He ran his finger along the marks. Each symbol is a barrel. Each mark tells me what's inside and when it was stored. These circles mean grain. These crossed lines mean meat. The little notches are months. You can read? You asked, surprised. He almost laughed. I can count, Agnes. I'm not educated, but I'm not stupid either. Besides, this isn't reading like in a book. It's remembering. I made the system. I know what each mark means. He paused. If I died tomorrow, nobody else could read it. Then teach me. He looked at you, really looked at you. There was pride there and something else, relief. All right, he said. We'll start with the basics. For the next hour, in the flickering, smoky light, you learned. There were no books, no parchment, just your father's calloused finger-tracing stories in the clay. Circle means grain. How many circles tells you how many barrels. A slash through the circle means it's opened. A cross means it's empty. Crossed lines mean meat. Position on the wall tells you which hook it's hanging from. A dot means pork. 2 dots mean fish. 3 dots mean sausage. The numbers are simple. 1 mark for each month since storage. When the marks reach 12, the food is probably gone. What about the vegetables? You asked, pointing to the sand pit. Those I don't track, he said. Too many and they move around. I just dig down and see what's there. If it's soft, throw it out. If it's firm, eat it. That's not very organized. Organization has limits, he said. At some point, you have to trust your hands and your nose more than marks on a wall. You thought about that, Trust your hands and your nose. It was good advice for vegetables. You had a feeling it was good advice for life. The torch sputtered, almost out. Your father stood. "One more thing," he said, pointing up at the low, meat-hung ceiling. "The temperature. I told you it stays steady, but I didn't tell you what that means for the food. Up in a cellar, things freeze in winter and rot in summer. Down here," he slapped the wall, "we're below the frost line. The earth is the blanket. It holds the summer's cool and the winter's warmth. Our food doesn't freeze. It doesn't rot. It just waits." He looked at you, his face serious in the dying light. 3 feet of earth above our heads. That's all it takes. 3 feet between us and the cold. 3 feet between us and everything that wants to kill us up there. 3 feet. It didn't seem like much. A man with a shovel could get through it in an afternoon. But shaped by knowledge, by generations of trial and error, those 3 feet had just become the difference between your village surviving the winter or not. You followed him back up to the gray daylight. The village was a hive of activity now, salvaging timbers from the burned houses, sorting through damaged goods. Your mother was waiting by your house. "Well?" she asked. "We'll make it," your father said. "It'll be close, but we'll make it." She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, they were wet, but she was smiling. "Then let's get to work." And they did. All of them, because that's how you survive. Not alone in your hole, but together. Fingers on the same hand, pooling what you have, sharing what you know. And trusting that beneath your feet, in the cool, dark patience of the earth, you've built yourself a fighting chance. 3 days after the raid, your father found you by the hearth, scrubbing a pot with sand. He didn't say anything, just laid a tool at your feet. It was a spade, but unlike any you'd seen the Lord's men use. Theirs had smooth handles and blades that caught the light. This one was older than you were, maybe older than your father. The handle was dark and shiny from decades of sweat and grip, worn down to fit the shape of a man's palm. The iron blade was thin from a lifetime of sharpening, pitted with age, one edge noticeably thinner than the other. "This was your grandfather's," your father said, his voice low. "He dug half our chambers with this. The other half with a pick that broke and had to be reforged. The blacksmith still complains about that job. You picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, and the balance was all wrong, like a rock tied to a stick. But then you shifted your grip, and something clicked. The weight settled, and it suddenly felt like an extension of your own arm. Every tool in this village has a story," your father said. "This one's dug more holes than stars in the sky. Graves, cellars, irrigation ditches. But underground work, that's what it was made for." He took it back for a moment, demonstrating. "See the blade? Narrower than a field spade. On purpose. In a tight passage, you need to swing without hitting the walls." He handed it back. "Today, you learn to dig. Not just any digging. Underground digging. It's different." You followed him to the edge of the village, near the hillside where your family's entrance was hidden, but not to it. Instead, you stopped before a patch of frozen ground that looked like every other patch. The Gruber family, Klaus and Hilda and their 2 kids, were waiting there, their faces drawn. They'd lost their house and their old underground chamber in the fire. It had collapsed into rubble. They were staying with cousins, but they needed a new sanctuary. "Headman Otto wants us to teach them," your father said. He said us like you were part of this now. You weren't sure you were, but your hand tightened on the spade's worn wood. Klaus Gruber was a nervous man with clever fingers better suited to mending harnesses than moving earth. His wife, Hilda, had a quiet strength about her. Their son, Friedrich, was about your age, trying to look taller. Their daughter, Lise, just looked lost. "Show me where you want it," your father said. Klaus led him to a spot on the hillside. "Here, this is where ours was before. We know the ground." Your father crouched, picked up a handful of the half-frozen dirt, let it sift through his fingers. He frowned. "Not here." He stood and pointed 20 feet to the left. "There, that's where you build." Klaus looked confused. The 2 spots looked identical to you. Dead grass, dirt, a few stones. "What's the difference?" Your father walked to Klaus's chosen spot and stomped his boot down hard. The sound was hollow, a dull thump that seemed to echo. Hear that? There's a cavity underneath. A gap in the rock, maybe from old water. Build on top of that, your walls have nothing to rest on. They'll shift, crack, collapse. He walked to the spot he'd picked and stomped again. This thud was solid, dense, final. Here you've got clay packed with stone. It'll hold. You filed that away. Listen to the ground. The ground will tell you if it's safe. We start by clearing the surface, your father said. Then he looked at you. Agnes, show them. Your heart jumped into your throat. He was testing you. You stepped forward, trying to look like you knew what you were doing, and began scraping away the grass and topsoil with your grandfather's spade. The key, you said, your voice surprisingly steady, is to cut a clean edge. Mark your boundaries first. Square or rectangle. Never round. Friedrich Gruber spoke up. Why not round? Seems easier. You remembered your father's words. Round looks easier, but the walls are harder to brace. Square walls can lean straight beams in the corners. Round walls, they need special support. More work. Your father gave a slight, approving nod. You cut a rectangle into the earth about 6 feet by 8. Big enough for a start, small enough to manage. Now, your father said, taking over, we dig, and you dug. For hours. The first foot was the worst. The surface layer was a tangled mess of roots, rocks, and the buried debris of generations. A piece of broken pottery, an old animal bone. Every thrust of the spade hit something that jarred your arms. But once you got past that skin, the earth changed. It became uniform, dense clay, packed tight by the weight of centuries. It didn't crumble. It came away in heavy, satisfying clods. This is what you want, your father said, holding up a chunk. See how it holds together? When we pack this into walls, it'll stay. Sandy soil falls apart. Pure mud turns to soup. But clay, mixed with a little sand and stone, that's your building material. By midday, the hole was 3 feet deep. Your arms were on fire, then your shoulders, then your back. Muscles you didn't know you had screamed at you to stop. But you didn't because no one else had. Your father called a rest. You collapsed against a tree, breathing hard, wondering how your grandfather ever did this. The hard part's over, your father said, handing you a water skin. First 3 feet are the worst. After that, the earth's more consistent. Fewer surprises. How deep do we go? Klaus asked. For storage, 6 feet is enough. For living quarters, 8 is better. Deeper means more stable temperature, but also more digging, more risk of hitting water. How do you know where the water is? You asked. Your father pointed to a cluster of willow trees 30 yards away. See how they're greener than everything else? Their roots are drinking from water close to the surface. Dig there, you'll hit water in 4 feet. Dig here, where the grass is short and brown. The water's much deeper. You looked at the landscape with new eyes. It wasn't just land. It was a map. The trees, the grass, the dips and rises. All of it was telling you secrets about what lay beneath. The afternoon was for learning walls. Your father showed you how to mix clay with straw, kneading it together until the straw was a skeleton within the earth. The straw holds it together, he explained. Without it, the walls crack with the seasons. With it, they flex. They breathe. He handed you a lump. It was cold, gritty, the straw poking your palms. The trick is getting it wet enough to stick, but dry enough to hold its shape. Too wet, it sags. Too dry, it crumbles. Your hands will learn the feel before your head does. Then there was the matter of wood. Good timber was precious. But your father showed you something that changed how you thought. He pointed to a crooked, twisted beam salvaged from the Gruber's burned house. Above ground, this is garbage. Carpenter would toss it. But down here, he fitted it into a corner of the new hole. The natural curve braced against 2 walls at once. Underground, the earth presses from all sides. A curved beam spreads the force. Straight beams push in one direction. Down here, crooked is better than straight. You thought of the beams in your own chambers. How many were rejected scraps that found their perfect purpose in the dark? Hilda Gruber, it turned out, had a gift for the clay work. Her hands, which seemed so tired, worked the mixture with a gentle, knowing skill. "I'm used to kneading dough," she said softly. "This isn't so different." Klaus was better at the heavy lifting, hauling buckets of good clay from the stream bank. Friedrich took over the spade when your arms gave out, attacking the earth with the furious energy of a boy with something to prove. The village blacksmith, Conrad, showed up later, a pickaxe over his shoulder like it was a feather. He was built like his forge, all thick muscle and old burn scars. "Heard you might need this," he grunted, dropping it. He stayed, offering opinions on everything. "You're building the walls too thick for a storage chamber," he declared. "Fine if it's just for turnips. But if it's for hiding, you want thinner walls, more chambers. Easier to expand later. Easier to connect." Your father considered this, then nodded. "He's right. We've been thinking about one whole. It's about a network." So you adjusted, planned for a future tunnel that would connect to your family system, giving the Grubers an escape route. By evening, the main chamber was roughed out. 6 feet deep, walls just starting to take shape. It wasn't finished, but it was a start. Your father lit a small fire at the edge of the pit, and everyone gathered around, the flames painting the raw earth walls in dancing light. "My grandfather told me something once," your father said, staring into the fire. He said, "The earth doesn't care about us, doesn't love us, doesn't hate us. It's just there. But if you learn to work with it instead of against it, if you listen to what it's telling you, it'll shelter you better than any king's castle." Klaus had his arm around Hilda. Their children were half asleep. But there was a new light in Klaus's eyes. Not happiness, but purpose. The knowledge that he could build something to protect his family. You felt it too. You ached everywhere. You were filthy. But underneath it was a quiet, solid satisfaction. You had moved Earth today. You had built. Your mother found you as the fire died. "You did good," she said simply. 3 words from her were worth 100 from anyone else. You walked home in the dark, your father carrying a sleeping Oswin. The stars were out, countless and cold. Somewhere up there might be gods or angels or nothing at all. But down here, beneath your blistered hands and your aching feet, there was Earth. Solid, eternal, and you were learning its language, one heavy, deliberate spadeful at a time. 2 weeks into that long, hungry winter, your father took you on what he called the walking tour. "You know our chambers," he said, pulling on his thickest sheepskin against the morning's bite. "You know Eric's, but there's more, a lot more. And if something happens, you need to know the whole network. The whole network." The words sent a shiver down your spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "How many are there?" you asked, your breath puffing white. 7 families connected directly," he said, counting on his fingers. 3 more close enough to reach through exits on the far side of the hill. That's about 30 adults who can move underground without ever breaking the surface. Add the children, we're pushing 50 people. 50 people. A second village, hidden right beneath the first. You started at your own familiar entrance, down the steps into the living chamber with its carved handprints. But instead of stopping, your father led you to the back of the storage room, to a passage you'd seen but never taken. It was narrower than the rest, barely wider than your shoulders. A schlupf, a slip passage, built narrow on purpose, your father said, turning sideways to squeeze through. Makes it harder to follow. 1 person with a knife could hold this against an army. The schlupf opened into another chamber after 20 feet of claustrophobic darkness. This one was smaller, but the walls took your breath away. They were covered in carvings. Deer, birds, a boar, all caught in mid-motion, rough but full of life. "The Muller family's place," your father said. "Old Franz carved these to keep his mind busy during the long winters. He's been dust for years, but his animals are still here watching. From here, 2 more tunnels spidered off. That way leads to the Vogels, the other to the tanner's place. Ulrich, you know his daughter, Greta. You did know Greta, a quiet girl who always smelled faintly of leather and lye. You'd never given her much thought. Now you realized her family was part of this hidden web, connected to yours by tunnels dug by hands that were now bone. The tour continued, each chamber a revelation. The Vogels had carved dozens of shelves directly into their walls, holding pots and mysterious boxes. Their ceiling was higher. My father was a tall man, her Vogel explained with a shrug. Got tired of ducking. Dug an extra 2 feet one summer. Stubborn, he was. Ulrich the tanner's chamber had a sharp, chemical smell. He keeps his curing solutions down here, your father whispered. Temperatures steady. Leather cures better in the cold. The nobles buy his goods and never know they came from a hole in the ground. There was a dark pride in that. The rich, wearing finery born from peasant cunning. But the most astonishing was old Gerd's complex. She lived alone, but the chambers she and her husband had built were a sprawling 3-room underground home. Wide archways connected the spaces, beautiful in their simple earthen way. Her husband started this before I was born, your father said, his voice hushed with respect, kept adding to it year after year. By the time he died, it was the biggest in the village. Gerd maintains it all herself. The old woman was there, sitting on a carved bench. She looked different underground, more at ease, like this was her true home. Wolf, she nodded to your father, and little Agnes, learning the ways. I'm trying, you said. Good. We need more young ones who understand. She gestured around. My husband spent 40 winters perfecting this. I've spent 20 more keeping it from falling apart. Takes knowledge. Patience. Your father left you with her for a while. Men dig, she said the moment he was gone, leading you with her lamp. That's what they're good at. Moving earth. But women maintain. We're the ones who notice the soft spot before the wall collapses. She stopped, pressed her palm to a wall. Feel this. You placed your hand next to hers. The clay was cool, slightly damp. Moisture seeping through. Not a problem today. Leave it 6 months. This wall is mush. From a pouch at her belt, she produced a paste of fat and ash, rubbing it into the spot in slow circles. This seals the pores. Once a month, I walk every wall in this complex. Most times I find nothing. The times I do, that's when it matters. She taught you to read the support beams. Cracks along the grain were fine. Cracks across the grain meant the wood was failing. She showed you ventilation shafts disguised as animal burrows, and drainage channels so subtly sloped you'd miss them if you didn't know. Then she showed you the false wall. In her deepest chamber, she pressed a certain spot on an unremarkable stretch of clay. A section, about the size of a door, swung inward on a hidden wooden frame. Behind it was a tiny room, barely space for 4 people to crouch. If they ever find the tunnels, Gerd said, her voice grave, if they ever come down here looking, this is where you go. Nobody knows about these except the families who built them. Not even the council. Inside were supplies, dried food, water, a lamp. Everything needed to survive for days while searchers passed by. My husband built this during the worst raids 50 years ago, she whispered. We hid in here for 3 days once, with 2 children and a baby. I kept my hand over her mouth the whole time. She paused. That was your Aunt Martha. You thought of Martha, Henrik's wife, her fear of tight spaces. Now you knew where it was born. When your father returned, he showed you the warning system. In a main passage, there was a hollow section of wall. Striking it in a certain rhythm, 3 fast thumps, 3 slow, 2 fast and 1 slow, sent vibrations through the packed earth to connected chambers. Anyone listening will hear it, he said. 3 fast means, get underground now. 3 slow means all clear. 2 and 1 means, meet at Eric's. What if someone's deaf? You asked. He had you press your palm flat against the wall as he thumped the signal. You felt it, a distinct pulse through the clay. The deaf feel it, he said. Your grandmother was going deaf at the end. She's the one who figured that out. Said she wasn't going to die because her ears stopped working. By the time you emerged, the winter sun was setting. The day had vanished in the timeless dark. At home, Over a meager supper, your father watched you. Check the chambers today? Yes. Everything good? You thought of Gerd's wise, tired eyes, the hidden room, the pulse in the wall. Everything's good, you said, and for the first time you felt you understood what that really meant. It wasn't just about dirt and timber. It was about a web of care, stretched taut beneath the feet of your entire world. The blizzard didn't just arrive in late January. It attacked. For 3 days, the wind screamed around the village like a thing possessed, and snow fell so thick it blotted out the world. By the second day, the drifts were higher than your door. By the third opening, it was impossible. The world had been reduced to a howling white void. Underground, your father said, and no one argued. You packed what you could carry in the dim, cold house. Blankets, the last precious strips of dried meat, the small pot of honey. Your mother tucked her silver cross inside her dress. Oswin clutched his carved wooden horse. The walk to the hidden entrance was a battle against a frozen, suffocating world. The wind cut through your layers like they were gauze, and the snow dragged at your legs with every step. By the time you brushed the snow from the disguised cover, your fingers were numb blocks of meat. But then you were underground. The howling vanished, replaced by a profound, blessed silence. The killing cold softened into that steady, familiar 50 degrees. You stood in the entrance passage for a long moment, just breathing the cool, still air, feeling your racing heart slow. You weren't the first down. The chamber was already lit, filled with the shapes of your neighbors. Eric's family, the Vogels, old Gerd, who had probably moved in at the first suspicious flake. More families filtered in over the next hour, a procession of the chilled and the terrified. The Mellers, Ulrich the tanner and quiet Greta, the widow Brunhild with her flock of children. Lastly came Henrik, the blacksmith's son, practically carrying his wife, Martha. She looked awful. Her face was gray and sheened with sweat, her breathing ragged. Her belly was enormous, a taut dome under her woolens. Your mother was at her side in an instant. "How long?" she asked, taking Martha's other arm. "Since this morning," Henrik said, his voice shaking. She didn't want to say anything, thought it would pass. Old Gerd exchanged a look with your mother. "It's not going to pass," Gerd said flatly. "This baby's coming. Storm or no storm." Henrik went as pale as the chalk used for marking sheep. This man who wrestled fire and iron every day looked utterly undone. Your mother took charge. "Go check the drainage channels, Henrik. Make sure they're clear." It was busy work, a kindness to give him a task. He fled down the passage. "Agnes," your mother said, turning to you, "come here." You had never seen a birth. You knew the theory the same way you knew how lambs came. Knowing and doing were different countries. The next hours blurred into a timeless, intense ritual. Martha labored on the sleeping platform, surrounded by furs and the village women. Your mother, Gerd, Brunhild, Hilda Gruber. They became a single unit of comfort, holding her hands, wiping her brow, murmuring low, steady words. The men stayed in the connected chambers, herding the restless children, keeping the lamps filled, staying out of the way. Your father's voice, telling Oswin some elaborate tale of nights, carried faintly through the earth. You became an extension of your mother. "Fetch clean cloth. Bring water from the storage barrel. Hold this. Press here." Your world shrank to Martha's pain, the women's focused energy, and the close, earthen walls that seemed to hold their breath. Near the end, Martha screamed. It was a raw, animal sound that seemed to shake the very clay. It echoed, and then was swallowed by the profound silence of the underground. In its wake came a wet, slithering sound, and then a new noise. A thin, furious, vibrant cry. "A girl," your mother said, her voice cracking with emotion. She held something small, red, and squirming, its tiny legs kicking at the cold air. Healthy lungs, good color. She placed the baby on Martha's chest. Henrik appeared in the entrance, his face a mask of awe and terror. "A daughter," Martha whispered, exhausted, triumphant. "Look, Henrik, a daughter." The big blacksmith sank to his knees beside the platform, tears cutting tracks through the soot ground into his skin. "What will you name her?" Gerd asked. Martha looked around, at the clay walls, the lamplight, the circle of faces that had ushered her child into the world not in a house, but in the belly of the earth. "Erda," she said softly. It meant earth. The name hung in the cool, still air. Perfect. The storm raged for 2 more days above, a distant, irrelevant fury. Life underground settled into a strange, strained routine. Headman Otto took a daily count. Meals were sparse, carefully measured. The children, after the initial fear wore off, grew bored and fractious. Your father told his halting stories. Old Hans taught them games with knuckle bones. The women mended and whispered. You found your own rhythm. You walked the walls as Gerd had taught you. Through your family's chambers, the maulers, the tanners, feeling for dampness, checking beams. It was more than a chore. It was an act of stewardship, a meditation. In the tight, dark silence, you learned the personality of each chamber. On the 4th day, the Muller boys got into a fight over nothing. A sleeping spot, a look, a breath. They were a tangle of limbs and fury on the dirt floor until their father and yours pulled them apart. The tension in the close quarters was a live thing, thinner than the walls. "Cabin fever," Gerd muttered to you later. "The real danger down here isn't the cold. It's ourselves. People start seeing enemies in their own blood." Her solution was constant, gentle management. Tasks for everyone. Space, even if it was just a mental corner. "The people who survive down here longest," she said, "find meaning in small things. A well-carved spoon. A story told right. A wall that stays dry. The big victories are rare. The small ones are everywhere, if you learn to see them." You carried that with you. Meaning in small things. On the 5th day, you woke to a new silence. You lay still, confused. Then you realized the constant, muffled roar of the wind was gone. The storm had exhausted itself. Your father caught your eye. Together, you slipped to the entrance. He pushed the cover up a crack. A sliver of blinding white light and a rush of clean, knife-cold air poured in. He opened it fully and climbed out. You followed. The world was reborn in white. An unbroken blanket of snow stretched smooth and pristine under a pink and gold dawn. It was devastatingly beautiful and utterly alien. No one would ever know a village, let alone a hidden warren of lives, lay beneath it. "Beautiful," your father murmured. "Deadly," you replied. He laughed, a real one. "Both. Same thing sometimes." You stood together in the immense, silent morning, the only 2 people in a white, new world. 5 days underground, a baby born, a community strained but unbroken. You had faced the winter's worst and been sheltered by nothing more than dirt, wisdom, and your own stubborn will to see the dawn. You went back down to wake the others. There was work to do. Digging out, assessing damage, facing a still long winter with depleted stores. But first, there would be breakfast. And for the first time in days, you would eat it in the light. Spring didn't come to the village. Seeped in, slow and muddy. One day, the icicles started dripping instead of growing. Then patches of ugly, bare earth showed through the snow. Then the air lost its knife edge and just felt wet and sorry for itself. But underground, spring announced itself with a single, urgent word: water. Old Gerd said it on the first vaguely warm day in March. That's what you watch for now. All that snow has to go somewhere. And somewhere is down. She was right. On your morning walk through the chambers, you saw it. The walls, dry and stable all winter, began to sweat. Tiny beads of moisture gathered on the smooth clay, merging into rivulets that traced paths to the drainage channels. Those channels, which had seemed like overcautious ditches, now hummed with a quiet, trickling purpose. The frost line, your father explained when you told him. All that frozen ground is waking up, turning to mud. Mud moves, seeps, finds every crack you missed. For the next week, your world was water management. It was boring, knee-aching, hand-chilling work. You crawled through the lowest passages, clearing leaves and old roots from the drainage channels, checking the collection pits weren't overflowing. making sure the subtle slopes your grandfather had engineered were still doing their job. It was a fight against silent, creeping disaster. You found a bird's nest wedged into a ventilation shaft. A wren? Probably, looking for winter shelter. Inside were 3 tiny, featherless skeletons. Chicks that never made it. You said a small, stupid prayer for them and cleared the shaft. Life and death happened down here, too. You just had to deal with the aftermath and keep the air flowing. The Grubers had trouble. Their new chamber, the one you helped dig, wasn't built with the spring thaw in mind. Klaus had dug his drainage channels level. Water pooled instead of flowing. One morning, shouts echoed from their direction. You and your father arrived to find Klaus and Hilda ankle-deep in muddy water, frantically moving their meager supplies to higher ground. "The collection pit is full," Klaus cried, panic in his voice. "I emptied it yesterday. Where is it all coming from?" "Everywhere," your father said, already grabbing a sack of grain. "The whole hillside is draining. You need a second outlet." It was emergency work, messy and fast. They dug a new channel connecting the Gruber chamber to the main network's drainage. By evening, the water was receding, and the Grubers were wringing out their blankets with a look of hard-learned relief on their faces. "Should have listened to you," Klaus muttered to your father. "You told me to slope the channels. I thought level was close enough." "Now you know," your father said, not unkindly. "Now you know. That was how lessons were learned down here. Usually the hard way. April was just more mud, but now it was mud under a pale sun. The fields were too sodden to work, so the village turned to other tasks. And to teaching. On a rainy afternoon, your father decided Oswin was ready. "Come on," he said to your wide-eyed little brother. "It's time you saw the whole rabbit warren." You asked to come along, curious to see it through his eyes. Oswin was terrified and trying desperately not to show it. His face went sheet-white when you dropped into the first chamber, even though he'd been down during the blizzard. That was different, that was hiding. This was knowing. "What's that?" he whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the ancient handprints on the wall. "Grandfather's hands," your father said, "and his father's before him, and others, back further than anyone remembers. Why? To leave something, proof they were here, that they mattered." Oswin thought about this. Then, without asking, he pressed his own small, soft hand against the clay next to the larger, ghostly prints. His fingers didn't reach as far. He was just a boy. Your father didn't scold him. He just watched, a small smile at the corner of his mouth. "Now you're part of it," he said. "Part of the wall. Part of the story." The tour continued. Oswin learned about the schluff passages, the ventilation, the signal wall. He was quiet, absorbing it all with a solemnity that made him seem older. The narrow spaces scared him. You could see his breathing quicken. You remembered your own fear. "It's okay to be scared," you heard yourself say. "I was scared too at first. Everyone is. The earth is heavy. It's above you and around you, and there's nowhere to run if something goes wrong. That fear, it keeps you careful." He nodded, not convinced, but he kept moving. By the end, he knew the signals. 3 fast, 3 slow, 2 in 1. He knew about the collection pits and the false wall in Gerd's chamber, sworn to secrecy on his life. He was 7 years old, and he'd been trusted with the weight of the world beneath his feet. You could see it changing the set of his shoulders. That night, he crawled into the straw next to you and whispered into the dark, "Agnes, do you think I'll be good at it? The underground stuff." You thought of how he'd been scared, but hadn't frozen, hadn't cried. He'd kept putting one foot in front of the other in the narrow dark. "Yeah," you said, "I think you'll be good at it." He was quiet a moment. "Better than you?" You snorted a laugh. "Don't push your luck, little brother." He giggled, then rolled over, and was asleep in minutes. You lay awake longer, listening to the house settle, to the drip of the last of the snow melting off the roof. Tomorrow, more work. Always more work. But for now, in the dark, with your brother breathing steadily beside you and the map of tunnels safe in your mind, things felt complete. Summer, when it finally crashed over the village, was a shock. The underground chambers traded one purpose for another. No longer a refuge from cold, they became an escape from the baking heat. That same steady 50 degrees that had felt like salvation in January now felt like a luxury in July. People began spending their afternoons in the cool dark, the women sewing and gossiping, the men napping, the children playing quiet games on the packed earth floors. "It's a room that's always November," your mother said, pleased with her description. She started keeping a summer larder down there, cheese, cream, fresh vegetables from the garden that wouldn't wilt. The social life of the village shifted underground in the heat of the day. You'd sit with the women, not for the gossip, but for the company, and because it was expected. They told stories while they worked, not of tunnels and building, but of their grandmothers, of harvests and heartbreaks of the old times. You listened. These stories were a different kind of survival, the survival of memory of who you were. You saw baby Erda often, brought down by Martha to Gerd's cool chambers. The old woman doted on her. "Born in the earth," Gerd would say, bouncing her, "makes her special. The earth will always know her." It was probably nonsense, but it was a good kind of nonsense, and it made Martha smile. By August, you knew every chamber like the back of your hand. You could walk the walls in your sleep. Gerd started calling you her apprentice, which made you feel strange and proud. You were 13. You shouldn't be anyone's apprentice. But down here, age mattered less than knowledge. And you had knowledge now, hard-won, lump by lump of clay. "You'll be the keeper when I'm gone," Gerd said one afternoon as you repaired a crack together. "You're not going anywhere. Everyone goes somewhere. That's the point of teaching. Making sure it doesn't go with you." You didn't like to think about Gerd being gone. She saw things no one else did. But she was old. The earth could protect from many things, but not from time. The summer storms were different, violent but brief. You didn't hide from them, but you always checked the chambers after, listening for the new trickle of water, the fresh damp spot. It had become part of you, as natural as breathing. Your father noticed. "You've got the touch," he said, watching you inspect a wall. "Some people never get it. They dig, they build, but they don't understand. I just pay attention. That's all understanding is," he said. "Paying attention long enough for things to make sense." When the harvest came in September, the chambers emptied of people and filled with grain again. The cycle turned. You'd lie in bed at night and think of the hands on the walls, the generations. Your handprint wasn't there yet. Not officially. Someday. But not yet. There was still so much to learn. So many small disasters to prevent. The earth waited. It was patient. It had been here before you and would be here after. But right now, in this season, it was yours. Your shelter, your memory, your anchor. And tomorrow you would walk the walls again. The first frost of the new winter came in late October, painting the fields in a brittle, glittering white. You were 13 now. Your birthday had passed quietly, marked by an extra dollop of honey in your porridge and a new pair of gloves. 13 felt different, heavier, more real. It had been almost a year since the raid. The village bore the scars, but they were healing. The storehouse was rebuilt, bigger, on stone foundations. The Gruber's new house stood solid. The burned patches in the fields had vanished under new growth. To a stranger, it would look like nothing had ever happened. But you weren't a stranger. You knew where to look. That was the difference. You woke before dawn, a habit now. You liked the quiet of the house before the day's demands crowded in. You pulled on your new gloves and slipped outside. The entrance to the chambers was hidden better than ever. Your father had laid sod over the wooden cover so it vanished into the hillside. You did your morning check, cover secure, no tracks, no disturbance. A ritual that took 30 seconds. The village was waking, smoke feathering from chimneys into the cold pink sky. You walked to Gerd's house. The old woman was already on her doorstep, a blanket around her shoulders, watching the dawn arrive like she was trying to memorize it. "Cold one," she said as you approached. "First frost. Felt it in my bones before I saw it." She pulled the blanket tighter. "Come inside. I've got something to show you." Her house smelled of herbs and smoke and deep thyme. She led you to her work table, where a piece of stretched hide was laid flat. On it, drawn in careful, shaky charcoal, was a map. "This," she said, her voice solemn, "is the network. Every chamber, every passage, every connection." You leaned in. It wasn't beautiful. The lines wavered, the proportions were guesswork. But you could see the logic of it. Your family's chambers here, Eric's there, the Mullers, the Vogels, the Tanners, all linked by the narrow slough passages. A secret web beneath the village. "I've been working on this since summer," Gerd said. "Getting it right. Making sure I didn't forget anything." "Why?" She looked at you, her old eyes clear and sharp. "Because I won't be here forever. And someone needs to know where everything is. Really know. Not just from walking it, but from seeing it all at once." You didn't argue. There was no point. She was old and she knew it. Pretending otherwise would be an insult. "I want you to have this. When I'm gone, keep it safe. Keep it secret. Don't show it to anyone unless they've earned the right." You took the hide carefully. It was soft, still warm from being near the fire. You rolled it and tucked it inside your tunic against your skin. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Learn it. Every line, every connection. Burn it into your memory so you could draw it yourself with your eyes closed." "I will." She nodded, satisfied. Then she did something she'd never done before. She reached out and touched your face, her fingers dry and papery against your cheek. "You're a good girl, Agnes. Better than I was at your age. Better than most people ever are." She dropped her hand. "Now go. I'm tired. And you've got walls to check." You left her by her fire. The morning passed in chores, but the map was a warm, heavy secret against your ribs. After the midday meal, you went underground. Not because you had to, but because you needed to. The way some people need to walk in the woods. You started your walk. Your family's chamber, the handprints watching. The Mullers' carved animals, frozen in their leap. The Vogels' high ceiling. The Tanners' chemical scent. Eric's chamber, where Erda had been born. You felt the walls, checked the beams, listened to the silence. Finally, you reached Gerd's complex. You walked every inch, your fingers tracing the walls she and her husband had shaped over a lifetime. In the deepest room, behind the false wall, you found it. A crack. Hairline thin, vertical, in the corner where wall met ceiling. You almost missed it. You pressed your palm against it. Cold. Damp. This was it. The exact kind of small, silent problem Gerd had taught you to find. A problem that, left alone, would become a disaster. You could fix it yourself. You knew how, but this was Gerd's chamber. It didn't feel right without her. You made your way back to the surface, across the village to her house. She was asleep in her chair. You hated to wake her. "Gerd." Her eyes opened instantly. "Agnes? What is it?" "I found a crack. In your hidden room. The corner near the ceiling." She was quiet, processing. Then, "Show me." You helped her up. The walk to her entrance, down the steps, through her chambers, was slow. She leaned on you, breathing hard. By the time you reached the hidden room, she was pale. You showed her the crack. She studied it, felt it, pressed her palm to it just as you had. "You found this on your own? Without me telling you where to look?" "Yes." A long silence. Then slowly she smiled. A real, deep smile that reached her eyes. "Good girl," she said. "Good keeper." She showed you how to fix it. A special mixture, different from the regular paste. Clay, lime, and a powdery substance from a jar that smelled like old eggs. You worked together, filling the crack, smoothing it over, making it strong again. "This won't last forever," she warned as you worked. "Nothing does. In 10 years, maybe 20, the whole corner will need to be rebuilt. That's how underground works. Constant maintenance. Constant attention." "I understand." "Do you?" She looked at you hard. "Really understand? This isn't just about clay and lime. It's about paying attention to the things that matter, even when nobody's watching. It's about caring for something beyond yourself. For people who aren't born yet, who will need these chambers 100 years from now." You met her gaze. "I understand," you said again. And this time you meant it differently. Deeper. She touched your face again. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think you do. By the time you left her chambers, the sun was setting in a glory of orange and purple. You stood at the entrance, half in the earth, half in the world. Behind you, the tunnels stretched away into protective dark. Ahead, the village settled for the evening, smoke rising, children being called in. You used to think of them as separate worlds. The house where you lived, the chambers where you hid. But that wasn't right. They were the same thing, different breaths of the same body. The earth was always there beneath you, waiting, patient, ready when you needed it. You closed the entrance carefully, replaced the sod. You walked home through the dusk, the map warm against your skin, your new gloves keeping out the chill of the first frost. Your mother had supper ready. Pottage, a piece of saved cheese, warm bread. Your family gathered around the fire. Your father, tired. Your mother, planning. Oswin, half asleep. The fire cracked. The wind sighed outside. This was what survival looked like. Not the dramatic raids or blizzards, but this, quiet evenings, shared meals, family gathered close against the coming cold. The big moments were just peaks. The rest of it, the living, was this. Your father caught your eye across the fire. Check the chambers today? Yes. Everything good? You thought of the crack, the fix, the weight of the map, the touch of Gerd's hand. Everything's good. He nodded. He trusted you now. You'd earned it. Wall by wall, passage by passage. After supper, as you helped your mother clean, she touched your shoulder. You were gone a long time today. I was with Gerd, learning things. She's teaching you well. She's teaching me everything she knows, because she won't be here forever. Your mother was quiet. None of us are here forever. That's why we teach, so something survives. You thought about that as you settled into bed. Outside, the frost was silvering the world. The first of many. The long nights were coming. But beneath you, under the floor, under the foundation, under the very dirt, the chambers waited. Steady, warm, ready. You closed your eyes. The map was memorized now, burned into your mind. A web of safety, a legacy of dirt. Your family was safe. Your village was prepared. The earth was patient, and you were its keeper. Winter clamped down in earnest after that first frost. It wasn't the dramatic siege of the blizzard, but a slow, grinding cold that settled in and seemed to squeeze the life from the world by degrees. The days were short, gray slivers. The nights were long and starched with ice. Above ground, life narrowed to the essentials. Feed the fire, feed the animals, feed yourselves, and try not to freeze in the spaces between. But below ground, life expanded in a different way. The chambers became more than a refuge. They became a second home, a workshop, a library of survival. With the fields frozen solid and the daylight scarce, people turned to the tasks that could be done in the steady, dim warmth of the earth. Your father and Eric, along with Klaus Gruber and a few others, began a new project, expanding the network. The raid and the blizzard had proven they needed more space, more connections. They started digging a new Schlupf passage, this one aiming to connect the Tanner's chamber on the south end to the Vogels on the north, creating a full loop beneath the village. If one entrance was discovered, people could scatter in either direction. You and Oswin were given the job of clay runners. Your task was to haul the good, sticky clay from the bank of the half-frozen stream back to the dig site, where the men would mix it with straw for the new walls. It was miserable work. The clay was freezing. It weighed a ton, and the buckets chafed your hands raw even through your new gloves. But you were part of it. You could stand at the edge of the new tunnel, watching the lamplight glow on the sweat-streaked faces of the men as they carved the earth, and know you had helped put that wall there. One afternoon, deep in the new tunnel, your father's pick struck something that didn't sound like clay. A hard, sharp clink. Everyone froze. In the silence, you all heard it. A faint, musical tink-tink as something metallic skittered down the newly dug face and landed at his feet. He bent and picked it up, wiping the dirt away on his tunic. It was a brooch, tarnished black with age, but when he rubbed it harder, a dull yellow gleam showed through. Gold. It was shaped like a bird. Its wings swept back, its eye a tiny, empty socket. A murmur ran through the tunnel. Treasure. In their earth. Old Gerd, who had come down to inspect the work, took it from him. She turned it over in her knotted fingers. "Older than the village," she pronounced. "Maybe older than the church. Someone was down here long before us. Hiding something." The mood shifted. It wasn't just a brooch. It was a message from the past. Someone else had known the safety of the deep earth. The network wasn't something your grandfather invented. It was something he rediscovered. The knowledge was older than anyone had guessed. "Should we keep digging?" Eric asked, his voice hushed. "Might be more." Your father looked at the brooch, then at the earth wall. "We dig for space, not for trinkets," he said finally. "But we dig carefully." The brooch went into his pocket, a secret within a secret. The find changed things. It gave the work a weight, a connection to a deeper time. You weren't just digging a hole. You were joining a chain of diggers that stretched back into the forgotten dark. A different kind of discovery happened in the main storage chamber. Martha, who had taken to spending time down there with baby Erda to escape the cramped, smoky heat of her own house, noticed something about the carrots. They weren't just staying fresh. Some of the smaller, forgotten ones in the sand pit, ones that should have been withered husks, had tiny, pale new shoots seeking the dim lamplight. "Look," she said, showing your mother. "They're trying to grow." It was true. Deprived of sun, confused by the constant cool temperature, the carrots were expending their last energy to put out ghostly sprouts. It was a waste of the vegetable, but it gave your mother an idea. The next day, she brought down a handful of saved barley seeds in a shallow, broken pot filled with dirt from the hearthside, dirt warmed and enriched by a season's worth of fire ash. She planted the seeds in the pot and placed it in a niche near one of the ventilation shafts, where the air moved just a little. "It won't work," your father said. "No sun. We have lamp light for a few hours a day," your mother countered. "And it's not freezing. Let's see." No one expected much, but a week later, pale, spindly shoots pushed through the dark soil. They were pathetic, stretched thin and white, not green. But they were alive. In the dead heart of winter, in a hole in the ground, something was growing. It wasn't a solution. It would never feed anyone. But it was a symbol, a tiny defiance. Life insisting on itself, even here. The pot became a curiosity, a thing people would check on during their daily rounds. A shred of hope growing in the dark. For you, the deepening winter meant more time with Gerd. Her joints ached too much for her to walk the whole network now, so you became her eyes and hands. She would sit in her chamber, wrapped in furs, and you would describe to her the condition of the walls in the tanner's section, or the sound of the drip in the new tunnel's collection pit. She would diagnose problems from your descriptions and give you instructions. You became the connection between her vast, stored knowledge and the living earth. "Tell me about the south wall in the old Muller chamber," she'd say, her eyes closed. "The one with the leaping deer." You'd describe the feel of the clay, the moisture level, the state of the central beam. "Ah," she'd say, "the beam will hold 2 more winters, no more. Start looking for a replacement. Crooked, remember, look for a crooked piece of oak. And the wall, use the ash paste, not the lime mix on that southern clay. It's different." You learned that the earth wasn't uniform. The clay from the stream bank was different from the clay on the hill, which was different from the subsoil in the meadow. Each needed to be treated differently, fixed with different recipes passed down not in writing, but in the memory of hands. One bitter day in late December, you found her shivering by her small hearth above ground, unable to get warm. You helped her down to her chamber. The steady 50-degree air wrapped around her, and she let out a sigh of pure relief. "The cold up there gets into the marrow now," she whispered. Down here, the earth still holds a little of summer's kindness." She looked at you. "Remember that when you're old. The earth takes the heat and the cold and makes it even. It's a gift." You nodded, but a cold finger of fear touched your heart. Gerd wasn't just teaching you how to care for the chambers. She was teaching you how to care for her, and showing you that her time in them was growing short. The winter solstice passed, the longest night. In the church above, Father Bernard said Mass. But in the chambers, people marked it in their own way. They lit a few extra lamps, shared a sip of precious ale from the stored barrel, and your father told a story, not of knights, but of the earth itself holding the village safe through the darkness, promising the slow return of the light. As you listened, curled in a niche with Oswin asleep against your shoulder, you looked around at the faces lit by the gentle, dancing light. Henrik, his arm around Martha, Erda asleep in her lap, the Gruber children wide-eyed, old Gerd, her face peaceful in the gloom. You saw not just neighbors, but the living heart of the network. The chambers were the bones, but these people were the breath. The deep dark of winter was a time of waiting, of inward turning. But down here, in the patient belly of the earth, you weren't just waiting for spring. You were building it seed by seed, passage by passage, memory by memory. You were learning that survival wasn't just about enduring the cold, but about nurturing the fragile, stubborn warmth at the center of things. And you understood, finally, what your father meant when he said the earth remembered. It remembered the sun's heat, and it remembered the people who knew how to listen. The deep cold held the village in a vice through January. Then, in the brittle quiet of a late afternoon, the bell rang. Not the frantic, hammering alarm of the raid, but a single, resonant, deliberate bong that hung in the frozen air. Then another, and another, a slow, mournful toll. It was the signal not for fire or attack, but for death. Your father, who was mending a harness by the hearth, set down his awl. His face went still. "That's the passing bell," he said quietly. 3 tolls for a woman. A cold that had nothing to do with the weather settled in your stomach. You knew before your mother, her hands covered in bread dough, whispered, "Gerd." It was Gerd. Old Hans found her. She'd gone to check on her goats in their sheltered pen and hadn't come back. He found her sitting against the stone wall of the pen, as if resting, a light dusting of new snow on her woolen shawl and her closed eyelids. The cold, they said, had just gently taken her in her sleep, a kindness in its way. The village buried her in the frozen churchyard 2 days later. The earth so hard it took the men hours to chip out a grave. Father Bernard said the words, his breath puffing like a small, ghostly engine in the air. People wept. She was the last of her generation, a bridge to a time before anyone could remember. After the burial, your father touched your shoulder. "Come," he said. "You didn't go to your house. You went to Gerd's." Her son, who lived 2 villages over and had come for the burial, was there, looking lost. He nodded silently to your father and stepped aside. Inside, the fire was dead. The house already felt hollow, just a shell. Your father went straight to her work table. The stretched hide map was gone. The son saw him looking. "She said to give any papers to the priest," he said, his voice thick. "For the church records. Was there something?" "It's fine," your father said, his voice tight. "Just an old woman's scribbles." You felt a panic rise in your chest. The map. Had she given it to the priest? Would it sit in a chest, forgotten or worse, be seen by curious eyes? But your father's hand was on your back, guiding you out. He didn't speak until you were outside, in the alley between houses, sheltered from the wind. He turned you to face him, his eyes searching yours. "The map, Agnes. Did she give it to you?" "Yes," you whispered, "before the first frost. She told me to keep it secret." The relief on his face was profound. He let out a long breath that hung in the air between you. "Good. That's good. It stays with you. It never leaves the network. You understand. I understand." He looked at Gerd's house, then back at you. "The knowledge is yours now, Agnes. Not just the map. The knowing. You're the keeper." The words landed with the weight of the frozen earth. The keeper. It wasn't a title anyone had said aloud before. It was a fact, settling onto your shoulders. It felt less like an honor and more like a deep, sobering responsibility. The network had just lost its oldest, wisest guardian. And you, a girl of 13, were what stood in the gap. That night, after a silent supper, you waited until Oswin was asleep. You took the rolled hide from its hiding place under your straw mattress and, by the dim, banked light of the fire, you spread it on the floor. Your father and mother came to look. Your mother's hand rested on your head, a silent blessing. Your father traced a line with a rough finger. This is our life's blood down there. And hers. He looked at you. Can you really see it all? You closed your eyes. And you could. Not the shaky lines on the hide, but the real thing. The cool darkness of the schlupf passages, the smell of Ulrich's tannin, the feel of the hand-smoothed wall in the Muller chamber, the sound of dripping water in the sump at the bottom of the Gruber's place. You saw it all, connected, a living, breathing entity beneath the village. I can see it, you said. Then it's yours, he said simply. The next day you began your rounds as the keeper. Felt different. Before you were checking. Now you were assessing. You started in Gerd's own chambers, your heart heavy. You walked every wall, feeling for the grief in the clay. In her hidden room, you checked the crack you'd fixed together. It was holding. You touched the spot, a silent promise to her memory. You found a problem in the Vogel's high-ceiling chamber. A support beam with a fresh, worrying crack running across the grain. You didn't panic. You thought, Gerd would say we need a crooked piece of oak. Eric has that windfall tree behind his barn. You went and found Eric, told him what you'd seen and what was needed. He listened, nodded, and said he'd have it trimmed and ready in 2 days. No questions. He accepted your word as keeper. Word spread quietly through the network families. The knowledge passed not with announcement, but in glances, in nods. When you passed Ulrich the tanner in the village, he paused and said, "The south drain in my front chamber sounds faster." When you have a moment. It wasn't an order from a grown man to a girl. It was a report to the keeper. You went. He was right. A new trickle was finding its way in. Together, you located the source. A root from a surface tree had finally penetrated the clay cap over his entrance tunnel. You showed him how to mix the thick ashen fat paste to seal it. He watched your hands, learned, and did the work himself under your guidance. This was the real work of the keeper, you realized. Not doing everything yourself, but making sure everyone knew how to care for their own piece of the whole. Gerd hadn't maintained the entire network alone. She had taught others to see. Now you were doing the same. Winter began its slow, grudging retreat. The days grew marginally longer. The ice in the water bucket by the door took longer to form at night. And in the underground, a subtle shift occurred. The constant, slight seepage of moisture from the thawing ground above increased. The drainage channels, which had been nearly silent, now carried a steady, quiet whisper of moving water. It was the sound of the earth waking up, and it was your job to make sure the village didn't drown in its sleep. One afternoon, you were in the new connecting tunnel with your father, checking the walls. The air was cool and smelled of raw earth. He stopped digging for a moment, leaning on his pick. "She would be proud, you know," he said, not looking at you. "Gerd." You didn't know what to say. You hoped it was true. "She saw it in you," he continued. "That you pay attention. That you don't just look, you see. That's the only thing that matters down here." He finally looked at you, his face smudged with dirt. The bell tolled for her, but what she knew, that didn't die. You're proof. He went back to digging. You stood in the tunnel, the sound of his pick striking clay filling the silence. The weight on your shoulders didn't feel lighter exactly, but it felt different, felt like it belonged there. You weren't just Agnes anymore. You were Agnes, the keeper of the deep places. And as the first hesitant drips of the thaw pattered into the collection pit, you knew your work, her work, was just beginning. Spring arrived not with a fanfare, but with a great, wet sigh. The snowmelt from the hills turned the village paths into rivers of mud so deep and clinging it could suck the shoes right off your feet. The world was a chorus of dripping, trickling, rushing water. And underground, the network drank deeply. Your days became a battle against damp. The seepage was no longer an occasional bead on the wall. It was a persistent sweat. The drainage channels hummed with a constant, low rush. You walked the walls not once a day, but twice, your fingers reading the clay like a blind person reads Braille, searching for the telltale softness, the cooler spot that meant water was winning its slow war. It was during one of these damp patrols that you found the stranger. You were in the oldest part of the network, a section of low, rounded tunnels that even your father said predated your grandfather's work. The air was cooler here, the walls a different, darker clay. You were checking a section where a persistent drip had kept a patch of wall spongy for weeks. You'd patched it twice. As you felt the spot, your fingers brushed against something that wasn't clay or straw. It was fabric. A coarse, rotten scrap of wool, the color of dirt, partly embedded in the wall. You picked at it gently, and a larger piece came away. Behind it, the clay was different, lumpy, mixed with more than just straw. You kept picking carefully. A length of old, brittle cord, then a smooth, curved shape. You pulled it free. It was a wooden bowl. Small, crude, blackened on one side as if from a fire. It was shockingly intact. As you turned it over in your hands, something rattled inside. You tipped it. A single, knuckle-sized bone, a rabbit's ankle bone, perhaps, tumbled into your palm. Your heart hammered against your ribs. This wasn't a lost brooch. This was a belonging. Someone had lived here, eaten here, in this very spot, so long ago that their wall had swallowed their things. You showed the bowl to your father that evening. He held it with a reverence usually reserved for the communion chalice. "The first keeper," he said, his voice hushed. "Or someone like them." He ran his thumb over the charred spot. "They had a fire down here. A small one, for light or warmth. Dangerous. One mistake and you smother." He looked at you. They were desperate or brave or both. The bowl changed something. It made the past tangible. The network wasn't just a project. It was a lineage. You were part of a chain of desperate, clever people stretching back into a darkness so complete you couldn't imagine it. A few days later, a different kind of guest arrived. You heard it first. A faint, skittering scratching, different from the rats. You followed the sound to a lesser-used storage niche in the Gruber's chamber. There, in a corner, was a hedgehog, curled tightly into a spiky ball. It must have fallen down a ventilation shaft. It was alive, breathing slowly. You didn't disturb it. You just watched. Here was another creature seeking refuge in the earth. You left a few dried apple pieces from your own meager lunch near it and went about your rounds. The next day, the food was gone, and the hedgehog had moved deeper into the niche. You smiled, could stay. It was part of the network now, too. But the most pressing unseen guest was the water itself. The Gruber's chamber, with its history of drainage problems, became the crisis point. The new channel your father had dug was overwhelmed. One morning, Klaus Gruber came to your house, his face pale. "It's not draining," he said. "The pit is full and it's coming up through the floor. You and your father went down." He was right. Water was welling up between the packed earth floor tiles, creating a shallow, growing pool. The problem wasn't the channel. It was the water table. The whole hillside was saturated. "The earth is full," your father said, grim. "It can't take any more. We need to give it a new way out." The solution was not to fight the water, but to guide it. They decided to dig a dedicated overflow tunnel, angling down and away from the network, to drain into the creek at the bottom of the hill. It was backbreaking, wet work. You spent days hauling out buckets of liquid mud. But as the new tunnel reached its outlet and the first gush of brown water poured freely down the hillside, the pressure in the Gruber's chamber eased. The pool began to shrink. It was another lesson. You couldn't stop the forces of the world. You could only give them a path of least resistance that didn't wash you away. Amid all this, baby Erda took her first steps. Not in her house, but in the main living chamber, where the even floor was safe and clear. She wobbled from Martha's arms to Henrik's, her little face a moon of triumph in the lamplight. The villagers down there that day clapped softly, a muted, joyful sound in the earth. She was the first to learn to walk in both worlds. As the ground outside finally dried to a workable state and the first green haze appeared on the trees, your work shifted again. The urgent, defensive battle against water gave way to the slower, careful work of repair and assessment. You and your father made a list using Gerd's map as a guide. South wall in Muller chamber. Needs redaubing before next winter. Central beam in Vogel chamber. Replace with crooked oak before autumn. Tanner's ventilation shaft. Clear nesting material. The network had been tested by winter, by thaw, by time itself. It had held, but it needed care. It was a living thing, and it was hungry for attention. On the last cold night of spring, you sat with your family by your hearth. Oswin was practicing his tally marks on a piece of slate. Your mother was sewing. Your father was sharpening tools. "Summer will be easier," your mother said, not looking up from her needle. On the surface, your father agreed. But down below, summer is for strengthening, for getting ready for the next winter, and the winter after that. You looked at the fire, thinking of the ancient, charred bowl, the sleeping hedgehog, the path of the overflow tunnel. The network wasn't just a hiding place. It was a record of people, of water, of creatures, of time. And you were its current scribe, writing the next chapter not with ink, but with clay, straw, and careful attention. The unseen guests, the ghost of the bowl's owner, the hedgehog, the relentless water. They weren't intruders. They were reminders. The earth didn't belong to you. You belonged to it. And your job as keeper was to negotiate the peace between all the things that needed its shelter. The first true warmth of summer brought not just relief, but a new kind of congregation. With the planting done and the fields a sea of hopeful green shoots, the village had a moment to breathe. And the men of the network, those who knew the secret in their bones, decided it was time for a meeting. Not in the church, not in the headman's house, but in the only place that made sense. Underground. Your father told you about it the night before. Otto, Eric, Ulrich the tanner, Klaus, Herr Vogel, myself. "And you," he said, his tone leaving no room for question. "Me?" You were stirring the evening pottage, your hand pausing mid-stir. "You're the keeper," he said, as if stating the weather. "The keeper sits in council." So, the next afternoon, you descended not into your family's chamber, but into the central hub, Eric's largest room, where Erda had been born. It was already lit by several lamps, their light pooling on the faces of the men seated on benches carved from old logs or simply on the packed earth floor. They nodded gravely to your father, and then, one by one, to you. It was an acknowledgement. You took a spot on a low stool near the wall, trying to make yourself small, but your heart was pounding. Otto, the headman, spoke first. "We've been lucky," he began, his voice a low rumble in the enclosed space. "The raid showed us our weakness. The blizzard and the thaw showed us more. But luck isn't a plan. The network saved us. Now we need to make it stronger, smarter." Eric leaned forward, his big hands on his knees. "Connections. We have the start of the loop with the new tunnel. We need to finish it. If the south entrance is compromised, we need a clear, known path north that doesn't bottleneck." Klaus Gruber, still looking worn from his battle with the spring flood, spoke up softly. "Water. My chamber, we learned the hard way. We need to map the water. Not just where it pools, but where it wants to go. All the chambers need overflow plans, like mine." This was your moment. You cleared your throat. The sound was too loud in the quiet room. All eyes turned to you. "The map," you said, your voice steadier than you felt. "Gerd's map. It shows the chambers, but not the water. We could add to it. Mark the low points, the sumps, the good clay for sealing." There was a pause. Then Ulrich the tanner nodded slowly. "The girl is right. We treat each chamber like its own problem. But water doesn't care about our walls. It moves through the whole hill. We need to think like the water thinks." It was decided. You would be the cartographer of the unseen. Over the next week, you walked the network with a new purpose. Instead of a lamp, you carried a small, smoky torch for better light and a stick of charcoal. On a fresh piece of birch bark, you began to sketch. You marked chambers with circles, passages with lines. But you also added symbols. A wavy line where the seepage was worst in the tanner's chamber, an arrow showing the slope of the Gruber's overflow tunnel, a crosshatch where the clay was particularly dense and good for patching. Your father and Eric, meanwhile, began the physical work of strengthening the loop. They chose the most direct route to connect the last gap, but the digging was hard, through a section of mixed rock and dense, root-bound soil. The work was slow, measured in inches per day. They used the crooked beam principle, bracing the new tunnel not with perfect timber, but with the gnarled, fork-shaped limbs of an old oak that had come down in a spring windstorm. One afternoon, while they were taking a break, you were checking your new map against the reality of the old Muller chamber. As you traced your finger along the wall next to the leaping deer carving, your fingertips found not a problem, but another piece of the past. Carved into the clay, so shallow you'd missed it 100 times, were not pictures but marks. Short and long lines, grouped in a strange pattern. You called your father over. He squinted at it in the torchlight. "Tally marks," he said after a moment, "but not for days or barrels. See the grouping? 5 short, 1 long. 5 short, 1 long." He sat back on his heels. "It's a count of people. A census, carved in clay." You imagined old Franz Muller, sitting in this chamber during some long-ago crisis, marking the presence of his family, his neighbors, assuring himself that everyone was accounted for in the dark. It was a keeper's note from a keeper before Gerd. You added it to your map, a small cluster of lines at the Muller circle. The history of the network was deepening layer by layer. The council met again a fortnight later, this time in your family's chamber. You spread your updated bark map on the sleeping platform. The men crowded around. You pointed with a clean twig. "The water wants to flow southeast, toward the creek," you explained, tracing the arrows you'd drawn. "The Gruber's overflow tunnel works because it goes with that flow. But here, in the Vogel's chamber, we're trying to drain against the slope. That's why the pump is always full. We should dig a small connecting drain from their sump here to link up with the main southeast flow." Her Vogel scratched his beard, looking at your lines. "It makes sense," he grunted. "My grandfather always said that corner was damp. We just bailed. We never asked why." That was the shift, from fighting symptoms to understanding causes. The Council of Earth was learning to think in connections, in flows, in the logic of the hill itself. The work continued through the summer. The new section of the loop was completed, a narrow but secure passage that meant a person could now enter at the Tanners on the south and exit at the Vogels on the north without ever surfacing. It was a victory. They celebrated with a taste of last year's elderberry wine. The rich, sweet taste strange and wonderful in the cool, earthy air. But the greatest change was in you. You were no longer just the girl who checked the walls. You were the one they asked, "Agnes, does this clay look right for the patch? Keeper, which beam should we use for this brace?" Your knowledge, stitched together from Gerd's teachings, your own observations, and the collective memory of the men, had become a resource. You had a seat at the council, not because you were a woman or a child, but because you held a piece of the puzzle no one else did. One evening, as you were rolling up your bark map, your father sat beside you. "You know," he said quietly, "my father taught me to dig. Gerd taught you to see. But what you're doing now, you're teaching us all to think about what we've built." He put a heavy hand on your shoulder. "The network isn't just holes in the ground anymore. It's becoming something wiser." You looked at your map, at the circles and lines and arrows that told a story of water, earth, and human grit. The Council of Earth wasn't just making the network stronger. It was weaving the separate, secret efforts of generations into a single, conscious plan. And you, with your charcoal and your careful eyes, were helping to write its next, smarter chapter. High summer baked the world above into a dusty, humming dream. The air in the fields wavered with heat, and the shade of a single tree became a precious commodity. But below, the network maintained its gentle, perpetual twilight, a cool exhale in the face of the sun's fury. This was when the underground became not just a shelter, but a workshop, a classroom, and a vault of deeper secrets. The focus of the council shifted from urgent construction to subtle refinement. The problem wasn't survival now, but efficiency, sustainability. How could they live better in the deep places? The answer, they began to suspect, was not in their own cleverness alone, but in partnership with the very earth they inhabited. It started with the carrots. Your mother's sad, pale sprouts in their broken pot had long since withered, but they'd planted an idea in Ulrich the tanner's mind. He was a man who understood processes, how hides became leather, how bark became tannin. "The earth here is alive," he said one council meeting, his voice thoughtful. "It's not just dirt, is full of tiny things. Things that break down the old and make soil. We store food in it to stop that breaking down. But what if we helped it along in some places? He proposed an experiment. In a disused niche at the very back of his chamber, where the chemical smell was faint, he began a compost pit. Not with food scraps, those were too precious, but with other waste. Ash from the hearths, crushed eggshells from the rare chicken meal, the straw too rotten for bedding, even the careful leavings from the privy, buried deep. We're always taking from the earth, he said. Grain, clay, shelter. This is putting something back, making the earth here richer. It was a strange alchemical idea. Most of the men were skeptical. But you, the keeper of cycles, of water, of air, of history, understood it intuitively. You helped him layer the materials, watching as he carefully balanced greens and browns, as he called them. The pit didn't smell, shrouded as it was in the cool, dry air and layered with clean straw. It just sat there, a secret transformation happening in the dark. A different kind of partnership began with the children. Greta, the tanner's quiet daughter, who had a memory like a trap, started following you on your rounds. She didn't ask questions. She just watched. Soon she was pointing things out. That beam sounds hollow, she'd say, tapping one with a knuckle. Or, the air feels still here. Is the shaft blocked? She was learning the language of the underground. Not the words, but the sensations. You began to teach her as Gerd had taught you. You showed her how to feel for dampness, how to listen to the sound of water in a drain, how to distinguish a safe crack from a dangerous one. She was a quick, silent study. One afternoon, she brought you a handful of pale, thread-like roots she'd found growing into the chamber from a crack near the ceiling. "They're drinking," she said simply. She was right. The roots of the great linden tree on the hill above were seeking moisture, probing the network. Instead of just cutting them back, you and your father decided to use them. In a section of the new tunnel where the wall was stable but bare, you gently guided some of the smaller, flexible roots along the surface, pressing them into a thin layer of fresh clay. "Let them grow here," your father said. "They'll bind the wall, make it living." It was a radical thought. Fighting nature was exhausting. Collaborating with it might be wiser. The most profound lesson, however, came from an apparent disaster. A late summer thunderstorm, of a violence that shook the very hills, dumped a torrent of rain in a few hours. In the Vogel's chamber, the increased pressure from the saturated ground proved too much for an old, hidden weakness. A section of wall, unbeknownst to anyone, had been slowly undermined by a forgotten animal burrow from decades past. With a soft, sighing rumble, it collapsed. No one was inside, thankfully, but when her Vogel went down the next morning, he found a heap of clay and rubble blocking the passage to the new loop tunnel. It was a catastrophe. Their precious escape route was sealed. The council gathered around the collapse, faces grim in the lamplight. The instinct was to dig it out immediately, to fight the earth that had betrayed them. But as they surveyed the damage, your father held up a hand. "Wait," he said. "Look at the fall." The rubble wasn't a random pile. It had slumped in a distinct, sloping shape. The earth hadn't just fallen. It had settled along the path of least resistance, following the line of the old burrow. "We dig against it, we might bring more down," your father said. "We dig with it, we might find a new, stronger shape." It was a gamble. For 3 days, they didn't remove the rubble. Instead, they carefully excavated the soft earth around the edges of the collapse, following the natural slope of the failure. They exposed the old, rotten beam that had given way and the cavity of the ancient burrow. Instead of just replacing the beam, they used the cavity. They built a small, arched niche into the newly revealed space, bracing it with stone and the most crooked timber they could find. When they were done, they hadn't just cleared a passage. They'd created a new, reinforced alcove, a perfect storage nook or a hiding spot within a hiding spot. The repaired passage was stronger than before. The collapse, a moment of failure, had taught them to read the Earth's own language. Sometimes, strength wasn't about resisting force, but about redirecting it. About finding the shape the Earth already wanted to take and making it your own. As the heat of summer began to mellow into the golden light of early autumn, you walked the network with Greta. You showed her Ulrich's quietly composting pit, the living root wall, the cleverly rebuilt alcove born from disaster. You showed her your map, now dense with symbols not just of problems, but of partnerships. A leaf for the compost, a tiny root for the living wall, an arch for the rebuilt niche. This isn't just a hiding place anymore, is it? Greta asked, her voice barely a whisper in the cool dark. You looked at the walls around you, at the history in the clay, the cleverness in the beams, the new, fragile collaborations with root and rot and water. No, you said, realization dawning as you spoke the words. It's a conversation. The network was no longer a monologue shouted into the earth by frightened people. It had become a dialogue. A slow, patient exchange between human need and the enduring, generous logic of the world beneath their feet. They were learning to listen to the roots, to the water, to the very soil. And in listening, they were learning not just to survive in the earth, but to belong to it. Autumn arrived in a blaze of fire, not of destruction, but of transformation. The forests turned to copper and gold, and the village threw itself into the harvest with a desperate, joyful energy. This was the true test. Would the scorched earth of last year's raid yield enough to see them through another winter? The answer came in the rustle of heavy wheat heads, in the weight of turnips pulled from the forgiving soil, in the fattened geese that would soon be salted away. It was a good harvest, not extravagant, but enough. The relief was a tangible thing, sweeter than the first apple. But for you, the keeper, the harvest had a dual meaning. As the grain sacks filled the rebuilt storehouse above, a different kind of gathering began below. The network, having passed through the trials of flood and collapse, needed its own harvest. A harvest of knowledge, of preparation, of sealing in the summer's lessons before the winter's lock. The council's work turned inward. Your bark map, now layered with symbols, became their holy text. The first task was the sealing. Before the ground froze, every patch of repaired wall, every new daubing, every sealed crack needed a final check and, often, a fresh layer of the special lime and ash mix for the damp clay, or the fat and ash paste for the drier sections. You, Greta, and the women of the network families became a daubing brigade. You moved from chamber to chamber, your hands perpetually stained with clay, smoothing and pressing the life-preserving plaster into the walls. It was rhythmic, meditative work. As you smoothed the cool mixture over the ancient handprints in your family's chamber, you felt you weren't just repairing. You were honoring. You were the newest layer in a story written in earth. The second task was the stocking. But this wasn't just about moving food from the storehouse to the underground chambers. It was about strategy. Using your map, the council plotted what would go where. The barley, which kept longest, went in the deepest, driest chamber, the old Muller's space. The oats, for daily porridge, went closer to your family's entrance for easy access. Turnips and carrots were buried in fresh, dry sand in the Gruber's chamber, now proudly dry thanks to its overflow tunnel. Ulrich's experimental compost pit was covered and left to its silent winter work. Henrik, the blacksmith, contributed a different kind of stocking. In the deepest, most secure chamber Gerd's old hidden room, he helped install a new kind of cache. Not of food, but of tools. A spare pick with a wrapped handle. 2 iron spade heads, oiled against rust. A coil of stout rope. A small anvil and hammer. If the worst happens, he said, his soot-lined face serious. If we're down here for a season, not a week, we need to be able to fix, to build, to adapt. This is our smithy in the earth. It was a frightening thought, that level of preparedness, but a prudent one. The third task was the most subtle, the remembering. As the harvest festival approached, your father and Otto decided the full story of the network. Its near failures and hard-won lessons needed to be passed to more than just the council. One evening, they gathered all the older children and young adults of the network families in Eric's central chamber. Not the little ones like Oswin, but those on the cusp of adulthood. Your father didn't tell stories of knights. He told the story of the spring flood and how Klaus's level drain had failed. He showed them the clever, crooked brace in the new tunnel. Eric explained the logic of the loop. And then they turned to you. Agnes, your father said, Show them the map. Show them what we see. You unrolled the bark on the packed earth floor. The children crowded around, their faces lit by curiosity in the lamplight. You pointed to the circles. This isn't just a drawing of holes. You began, your voice finding its keeper's steadiness. This is a drawing of problems solved. This wavy line here, that's where the water wants to go. Our job isn't to stop it, but to give it a path. This mark here, the little root, that's where we're working with the tree above, not against it. You showed them the symbol for the compost pit, the mark for the tool cache, the tally marks from the Muller wall. You were showing them the language of the network, a language of observation, of cause and effect, of quiet partnership with the earth. Friedrich Gruber, now 14 and filling out, pointed to a section of the map. What if there's a problem, and you're not here? He asked. It was the right question. Then you use the language, you said. You feel the wall. You listen to the drain. You look for what the earth is telling you. And you remember that every mark on this map was made by someone who learned something the hard way, so you don't have to. It was the harvest of secrets. You were no longer hoarding knowledge like a hidden treasure. You were sowing it, like seed, in the minds of the next generation. The network's strength would no longer depend on a single keeper, or even a council, but on a community of people who understood its logic. The Harvest Festival itself was a bittersweet affair. There was music from a borrowed fiddle, dancing on the hard-packed threshing floor, and a shared stew made from the first of the slaughtered pigs. But your joy was tempered. As you watched the flames of the bonfire leap against the night sky, you thought of the cool, dark silence below, now stocked and sealed and waiting. You thought of Gerd, who should have been here. You thought of the ancient bowl and the phantom who had owned it. You slipped away from the firelight for a moment, to the edge of the village where the hillside slept under the stars. You couldn't see the entrance, not even in the moonlight. It was perfect. The earth kept its secrets well. Your father found you there. He stood beside you, not speaking for a while. Then he said, "You've given them more than a map, you know? You've given them a way of seeing. That's a finer harvest than any wheat." You looked up at the vast, starry bowl of the sky, then down at the invisible ground beneath your feet. The festival's laughter was a distant melody. Down below, the chambers were silent, full of food, tools, and hard-won wisdom. The village was celebrating the harvest of the sun. But you, the keeper, had overseen the harvest of the dark. And you knew, with a certainty that settled deep in your bones, that both were needed to see the spring. The first snow came early, a soft, silent dusting that foretold a hard winter. It was in this brittle, waiting time that the stranger appeared. He came at twilight, a solitary figure on the forest road, leaning heavily on a staff. He was wrapped in a traveler's cloak so worn it was the color of the road itself, a gray pilgrim. He went straight to the church, as was customary, seeking sanctuary for the night. Father Bernard, bound by holy law, gave him a corner by the hearth and a bowl of thin soup. The village watched him with the wary curiosity reserved for outsiders. He was old, his face a network of wrinkles, but his eyes were a startling, clear blue. He spoke little, just gave blessings in a low, rasping voice. He said he was heading to a monastery in the mountains, a late pilgrimage before the snows closed the passes. But old Hans, who had a nose for trouble sharper than his goats, sidled up to your father the next morning. "He's no pilgrim," Hans muttered, his breath fogging the air. "His boots, good leather, hardly worn. Pilgrim's boots are dust and holes, and his hands soft, no calluses from a staff." Your father's face grew still. He shared the news with Otto and the council. A quiet alarm spread through the network families. Was he a scout? A tax collector in disguise? A wandering thief casing the village before a winter strike? The pilgrim stayed a second night, claiming a slight fever. He spent much of the day sitting by the church door, his sharp blue eyes seeming to note everything. The rebuilt storehouse, the new timber on the Gruber house, the paths people took to the well. He asked innocent questions of the children who dared approach. How many families, how deep the snow got, if travelers often passed through. That evening, the council met in urgent, hushed conference in Eric's chamber. The air was thick with fear. "We should encourage him to leave," Klaus Gruber said, his nervous hands twisting. "And if he refuses? If he's from the Lord's court, reporting on our hidden grain?" Otto countered, his voice grim. "A voluntary contribution for the Lord's winter feast could starve us. We could hide everything," Eric rumbled. "Move it all down here tonight. The entrance," your father said, the word hanging in the air. "If he's seen anything, if he's guessed." A curious man poking around that hillside. You listened, the map of the network burning in your mind. You thought of the soft-handed pilgrim with his seeing eyes. And then you thought of Gerd, of her stories of false pilgrims in the old days, spies for bandit bands. But you also thought of the true desperation that drove a man onto winter roads. "You're thinking something, keeper," your father said, his gaze settling on you. The other men turned. "He sees what's on the surface," you said slowly, feeling your way through the idea. "The new wood, the full storehouse. What if we showed him something else? Not to scare him away, but to satisfy his curiosity. Something that explains what he sees, but hides the real truth." They were silent, waiting. "We have the old root cellar," you said. "The one near the midden that everyone knows about. This half-collapsed, useless. We could accidentally let him see us taking a few sacks down there tonight. Make it look like that's where we store our extra. It's plausible. It's what he'd expect. And it's far from the real entrances." It was a gamble, play of shadows. Instead of hiding their secret, they would dangle a decoy. Otto nodded slowly, a grim smile touching his lips. "A false harvest for a false pilgrim. I like it." The plan was set. As full dark fell, your father, Eric, and Henrik made a show of carrying 4 heavy-looking sacks, filled mostly with straw and a top layer of grain, from the storehouse toward the old, crumbling root cellar near the village midden. They made noise, fumbled with the rotten door, swore convincingly. They made sure the gray pilgrim, sitting by the church's small window, could see the lantern-lit pantomime. You watched from your doorway, heart in your throat. The pilgrim's silhouette was visible at the window, still as a carving. He watched the entire performance. The next morning, the pilgrim announced his fever had broken. He thanked Father Bernard, blessed the village, and took to the road again, heading east, away from the mountains he'd claimed as his destination. The village held its breath. 2 days later, a different traveler came. A peddler everyone knew. A garrulous man named Stefan with a cart full of pins and pots and news. Over ale in the tavern, he shared the gossip of the road. "Heard you had the visit from the gray man," he said, wiping his mouth. "The pilgrim?" Otto asked, his voice carefully neutral. Stefan chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Pilgrim, that's a good one. He's a Reeves man. Works for Baron Hofmeyer, 2 valleys over. His job is to wander in the autumn, see which villages look fat before the snow, so the Baron knows where to send his requests for a winter tithe." Stefan leaned in. "He's got a reputation, sees everything, but he's lazy. If he sees a village putting its grain in a hole in the ground by the midden, he marks it as poor but cunning and moves on. Saves his lord the trouble of a fruitless squeeze, and saves himself a longer report. The relief in the room was so thick you could taste it, sour and sweet. The decoy had worked. The pilgrim had seen exactly what they wanted him to see. A village scraping by, hiding its meager surplus in a useless hole. That night, the council met again, not in fear, but in weary triumph. "We didn't just hide," your father said, a new respect in his eyes as he looked at you. "We told a story, and he believed it. The gray pilgrim had tested the network in a way fire or flood never could. He had tested their cleverness, their ability to think like the enemy, to use secrecy not just as a blanket, but as a weapon of misdirection. They had defended their Earth not with spades, but with a performance. As the first real snow began to fall, blanketing the decoy root cellar and the true, hidden entrances alike, you felt a new layer of understanding settle upon you. The keeper's role wasn't just about maintaining walls or reading water. It was about guarding stories. The true network was more than chambers and tunnels. It was the tale they told the world above. A tale of poverty, of simplicity, and the richer, deeper, truer story, the one of community and cunning and stored hope. That story lived only in the dark, in the trust between them, and in the lines of a map drawn on bark. The winter would be long, but they had protected their harvest from a subtler thief than rats or rot. They had outwitted a man who traded in secrets, and in doing so, they had harvested the most valuable crop of all. The confidence that their secret was not just safe, but smart. Winter solidified its grip. The world became a study in monochrome. White snow, gray sky, black branches. The cold was no longer an enemy at the gate. It was the very air you breathed, a crystalline presence that made every exhale a small, vanishing ghost. Life retreated into the smallest, warmest circles, around hearths, under blankets, and deeper into the patient earth. But in the deep places, a new challenge arose, born from the very stability that made them safe. The problem was light. Lamps were precious. Oil was labor, pressed from linseed or poppy, traded for, hoarded. A lamp could burn for maybe 4 hours on a good day. In the long darkness of midwinter, when the sun seemed a pale memory, for hours of dim, smoky light was a pittance. The network, which provided warmth and shelter, was plunged into a profound, inactive dark for most of the day and night. People slept more, talked less. The mood, especially in the long stretches between the brief communal lamplit meals, grew somber, a creeping mental chill that was harder to fight than the physical cold. You felt it as keeper. Your walks to check the walls had to be brief, guided by memory and touch as much as sight. It was during one of these blind-feeling tours that you made the discovery. You were in the section of the new loop tunnel, the one that passed closest to the surface. A strange, faint glow seemed to emanate from a rough patch in the ceiling. Not the yellow of lamplight, but a cool, blue-white phosphorescence. You stopped, confused. As your eyes adjusted, you saw it wasn't light from the chamber, but light through the earth. You called your father. Together, they carefully chipped away at the spot. What they revealed wasn't a hole, but a lens. A fist-sized, perfectly clear disk of ice that had formed in a pocket of pure clay, fed by the slow seep of water from above that had frozen in a singular, flawless crystal. The weak midday sun, filtering through feet of snow and soil, was being gathered and focused by this natural lens, casting a dim, ethereal spotlight onto the tunnel floor. It was a miracle of accident. But your father, looking from the ice lens to your thoughtful face, saw more than accident. "It's a message," he said, his voice hushed. "The earth is showing us how to see." The council convened around the icy marvel. The light it cast was useless for work, but its principle was revolutionary. "We can't make ice lenses," Ulrich the tanner said, his practical mind already turning. "But what about water? A clear vessel of water?" Henrik the smith shook his head. "Glass, that's what we need. But glass is for churches and lords." "Not glass," you said, the idea forming as you spoke. "Ice is just frozen water. Light passes through it. What else is clear? What else do we have?" You thought of the things in the network. The ceramic pots were opaque. The wooden barrels. The stream, you said suddenly. In summer, where it runs shallow over the flat stones, the water is clear. You can see the bottom. They looked at you as if you'd spoken in another tongue. "We bring the light in," you insisted, growing more excited. "Not with fire we have to feed, but with the sun we can't stop. We dig not down, but up, carefully. Small shafts straight up from the chambers to the surface. We cap them with clear horn or even with thick, clear ice we make in pans. The light falls down the shaft." It was a mad idea, but it was also the first spark of genuine innovation any of them had proposed in the long dark. It wasn't about hiding better. It was about living better in the hide. They started with a test. In the central chamber, directly below a patch of ground that caught the winter sun, they dug a narrow chimney, no wider than a man's arm, angling it carefully to follow the path of the sun. At the top, they fashioned a cap from the clearest, thinnest scrap of scraped calfskin they had, stretched taut over a hoop and sealed with fat. It was crude, but on the next clear day, at high noon, a faint, golden column of light pierced the darkness of the chamber, illuminating a circle of earth on the floor. The effect was magical. It wasn't enough light to work by, but it was enough to lift the heart. To see the sun's mark, however faint, deep in the belly of the earth, was to remember the world above was still there, still turning. The success of the sun chimney spurred other innovations born of the light famine. Your mother and the other women began weaving baskets from willow withes not by lamplight, but by memory and touch, their fingers flying in the dark, creating useful shapes from pure habit. Old Hans taught the children to identify objects, a stone, a tool, a type of root vegetable, by feel and weight alone, turning necessity into a game. And you, the keeper, developed a new skill. You began to know the network by its sounds and smells. The different echo of a dry chamber versus a damp one. The scent of the tanner's chamber versus the earthy smell of the root storage. You could walk from your family's chamber to Gerd's old complex with your eyes closed, navigating by the subtle pressure of the air, the texture underfoot, the memory map in your mind now reinforced by a symphony of non-sight. The ice lens eventually melted as the Earth's warmth reached it, leaving only a damp spot on the tunnel ceiling. But its lesson remained. The challenge of the dark hadn't broken them. It had forced them to see in new ways. They had learned to use the sun as a servant, to trust their hands in the black, to read the silent language of their sanctuary. One evening, as you all sat in the main chamber during the precious lamp hours, Oswin, who had been quiet, spoke up. "It's not so scary in the dark anymore," he said, his small voice firm. "My ears can see." Your father laughed, a warm, rich sound in the earthen room. "Out of the mouths of babes," he said, ruffling Oswin's hair. Then he looked at you, the lamplight reflecting in his eyes. "The dark was a wall. We thought we had to wait for morning on the other side. But you found a way to make a window in it. The winter was only half gone. The cold was still a brutal fact. But the profound, demoralizing darkness had been defeated. Not by conquering it, but by learning its secrets, by adapting to its terms. The network had always been a shield against the cold. Now, in the heart of the deepest dark, they had learned to make it a lantern. The winter solstice passed, a silent hinge in the year. The days began, imperceptibly at first, to gain length. But the cold held on with a bitter tenacity, as if jealous of its dominion. In the network, the brief, precious sun from the chimneys was a daily reminder that the world above still turned, but it did little to warm the stone-like air. This was the time of deep stillness, of waiting. And in this waiting, you found a new purpose. The idea came from the map. Your bark map was a record of the present, of water flows, of repairs, of stores. But the network had a past, a story told in the things embedded in its walls and floors. The ancient brooch, the charred bowl, the tally marks. These were fragments of a narrative older than Gerd, older than your grandfather. They were the network's memory, and it was fading with every crumbled patch of clay, every repaired wall. You became, by unspoken agreement, the network's scribe. But your parchment was not vellum. It was memory. Your ink was observation. You started in the oldest section, the rounded tunnels. With a small, sharp flint, you began to make your own marks on a smooth section of wall in a disused niche, your own private ledger. You didn't carve pictures. You carved symbols, a language only you needed to understand. A small bird shape for where the brooch was found. A simple bowl for the charred artifact. A cluster of 5 short lines and 1 long for the Muller tallies. You added the date of Erda's birth, a tiny swaddled bundle. You marked the location of the ice lens with a star. Then you expanded. You walked every chamber with the eyes of an archaeologist. In the Gruber's chamber you found, half embedded in the floor near the sump, a perfectly round stone too smooth to be natural. A gaming piece, perhaps, lost by a child generations ago. You added a circle with a dot to your wall lexicon. In the Vogel's high-ceilinged room, you noticed that one of the carved shelves had a series of small, neat notches along its edge. Not functional. Account of something personal? Days of isolation? Loaves of bread? You added a shelving symbol with tick marks. You showed your father your growing chronicle. He traced the symbols with a rough finger, his face solemn. "You're writing the soul of this place," he said. "These walls, they've seen more than any of us. You're giving those ghosts a voice." The work gave the long, dark hours a shape. Greta began to help, her keen eyes spotting things others missed. A fishbone sealed in a wall, the impression of a woven basket in a patch of clay. She would bring her finds to you, and you would decide if they earned a symbol. It became a game, a sacred treasure hunt in the dark. One day, you made a discovery that stopped your heart. You were in the deepest part of Gerd's old complex, checking the repaired crack in the hidden room. As you ran your hand over the wall next to it, your fingers caught on the faintest of grooves. You brought your lamp close. There, almost invisible, was a single word, scratched into the clay in clumsy, uncertain letters. Frid. A name. It was so human, so vulnerable. Not a tally, not a symbol, but a name. Frid. A man, a woman, a child? Someone who had hidden in this very spot, in some long-ago terror, and had left this tiny, brave assertion of self. "I was here. I am Frid." You didn't add it to your lexicon. You left it alone, a sacred text in its own right. But you carved your own symbol nearby, a single, upright line like a person standing, a marker for the presence of a soul. This act of remembering began to change how the council saw the network. It was no longer just a tool, a hiding place. It was a legacy. When they discussed repairing a wall, they now asked, "Is there history there? Should we work around it?" When Henrik suggested placing a new tool cache, he chose a spot without markings, respecting the unseen archive. The work even seeped into the world above. During the brief daylight hours, people started noticing the history embedded in their own village. The worn stone step by the well, the ancient, gnarled pear tree that still bore fruit, the foundation stone of the church with its faded mason's mark. The act of seeking memory below ground had sharpened their sight above. On a day of piercing cold, when the sky was the color of iron, the village received a different kind of visitor. A monk from a distant abbey, traveling with a small guard. He was collecting tales for a chronicle of the region, stories of floods, of famines, of notable events. Father Bernard hosted him. The monk interviewed Otto, who spoke of the raid, the fire, the hard winter. He spoke in general terms of cellars and shared hardship. He did not mention the network. The monk, a kind-faced man with ink-stained fingers, nodded and wrote in his book. "And how did you survive?" he asked. "With the storehouse gone?" Otto gave a shrug, the picture of peasant simplicity. "The good earth provides, brother. We had some put by, and the forest is not entirely barren, even in snow." It was a performance worthy of the Grey Pilgrim encounter. Later, you asked your father if they should tell the monk about the network, about the cleverness. "Put it in his book," you said. Your father shook his head. "Books travel, Agnes. They go to lords, to other abbots. Our strength is in being forgotten, in being beneath notice. Let him write that we are simple folk who got lucky. That is the story that keeps us safe." He put a hand on your shoulder. "Your history, the one on the wall, that's the true chronicle. And it stays here, with us, in the earth where it belongs." You understood. There were two kinds of history, one for the world, which was a mask, and one for yourselves, which was a root, buried deep, feeding your sense of who you were. That night, in the flickering lamplight of your family's chamber, you took your flint and added one more symbol to your private wall. Not for a thing found, but for a lesson learned. You carved a simple book, its pages shut. Then, next to it, you carved an eye wide open. The monk left the next morning, his book full of acceptable surface truths. And you went back down into the quiet, living memory of the earth, the true scribe of a history that would never be written, but would never, ever be forgotten. Spring, when it finally wrestled free of winter's grip, did not come gently. It arrived as a thaw so rapid it seemed the world was weeping. Streams became torrents, the fields lakes of churned mud. And in the network, the great seasonal sigh of the earth was a roar. The drainage channels, so carefully mapped and tended, sang a constant rushing chorus. The sump pits filled faster than they could be baled. It was the Gruber's crisis from the year before, writ large across the entire system. This was the test of all their preparations, of the council's planning, of your map. And for the first 3 days it felt like they were losing. The water was winning. Damp became seepage. Seepage became trickles down walls that had been dry for months. A low, pervasive anxiety, colder than the water itself, seeped into the people. Then, on the 4th morning, as you were checking the main inflow into the Gruber's chamber, the front line of the flood, you saw it. The water, which had been spreading across the floor, had found the new overflow tunnel. But instead of flowing smoothly down it, it was churning, blocked. You waded in, the icy water numbing your legs to the knee, and felt with your hands. A dam of debris roots, a collapsed clod of clay, a tangle of old straw had jammed the tunnel's mouth. This wasn't a failure of design. It was a simple clog. But in the panic of the rising water, no one had thought to check the outlet. They'd been too busy bailing at the source. You called for your father and Eric. Together, they cleared the debris in minutes. With a guttural groan, the pent-up water surged down the overflow tunnel, its song changing from a frustrated churn to a relieved rush. The water level in the chamber began to drop, visibly. It was a simple lesson, but a profound one. A chain is only as strong as its most neglected link. Your map had arrows showing where water should go, but it hadn't accounted for the things that could stop it. The council met that evening, not in a chamber, but in the mouth of the Gruber's overflow tunnel, the sound of rushing water their backdrop. They were tired, mud-spattered, but the edge of panic was gone. "This isn't just about digging channels," Otto said, his voice firm over the water's noise. "It's about maintaining them. It's a promise, a covenant." The word hung in the damp air. Covenant. It was a priest's word, a word for sacred vows. But it fit. They decided then and there to formalize the unwritten rules that had been evolving for over a year. They called it the Earth Covenant. You, as keeper, helped write it not on bark, but in the decisions they made. First, every family with a chamber is responsible for its own sump and primary drain. They will be checked every new moon and after every heavy rain. Second, the common channels, the main overflow, the loop tunnels are the responsibility of all. A work rotation will be made. Third, any change to a wall, a tunnel, a drain, must be marked on the keeper's map, so all know the new shape of our shelter. Fourth, in spring and autumn, all will gather for the great clearing, to walk the entire network together, clearing every channel, checking every beam. It was the birth of true governance, born not from a lord's decree, but from the shared understanding that their individual survival was inextricably linked to the health of the whole. The network was no longer a collection of private holes. It was a communal organ, and they were all its caretakers. The first great clearing was held as the last of the meltwater subsided. It was not a chore, but a festival of mud. Families worked in assigned sections, children bailing out small puddles with wooden bowls, women scrubbing algae from the walls, men hauling debris. They shared food in the tunnels, their laughter echoing in the spaces usually reserved for whispers. For the first time, the network felt not just like a refuge, but like a home they were building together, actively, joyfully. During the clearing, another fragment of the past was found. In a side niche of the old tunnel, young Friedrich Gruber, now working with a man's seriousness, uncovered a small cache of flint arrowheads, beautifully crafted, and a bone needle, not hidden in panic, but stored with care. A hunter's kit or a woman's sewing, left for a return that never came. They placed the items respectfully in a new niche, a little museum of the deep. As the ground outside finally dried and the first green spears of crops broke the soil, the covenant extended its logic upwards. The villagers began to apply the same principles of shared maintenance to their irrigation ditches, to the fencing of common pasture, to the repair of the road. The lessons of the deep earth, that a blocked drain floods everyone, that a weak beam endangers all, were teaching them how to be a community above ground as well. One evening, you and your father stood at the entrance to the network, now disguised by a thriving patch of wild strawberries Greta had transplanted. The village below was peaceful in the twilight. "We didn't just build a hiding place, did we?" you said quietly. Your father shook his head. "We built a mirror, and we didn't like what we saw in it at first, just a bunch of scared people in a hole. So we kept polishing it, fixed the cracks, cleared the drains, learned its history, and now," he gestured to the village, "the reflection is starting to look like something worth saving." The Earth Covenant was more than a set of rules. It was an acknowledgement. They had made a pact with the ground beneath their feet, and in doing so, they had made a new pact with each other. They were no longer just villagers bound by proximity and a lord's law. They were custodians of a secret, partners in a deep, patient work. The earth sheltered them, and in return, they pledged to remember, to maintain, to think of the next winter, and the winter after that. The network had saved their lives from raiders and cold. But the Covenant, born from a clogged drain in a flood, just might save their souls. The high, green heart of summer was a time of fullness. The fields ripened under the sun, the network rested cool and dry below, and the Earth Covenant had settled into the rhythm of daily life like a well-worn tool. The crisis of the past 2 years, raid, blizzard, flood, had receded into story. But you, the keeper, felt a new kind of restlessness. Preservation was no longer enough. The Covenant was about maintaining what they had built. But what about what they could become? The idea, as many did, came from a small thing. Greta, your quiet shadow, had taken to sketching. Not on bark, but with a stick in the smooth dirt of the tunnel floors. She drew flowers she saw above, the shapes of leaves, the faces of the village children. One day, she drew something else. A cross-section of the network itself, showing chambers stacked like bubbles in the hill, with little sun chimneys reaching up like stems. You looked at her drawing, crude but insightful, and a thought crystallized. The network was reactive. It answered threats. Cold, raiders, water. What if it could be proactive? What if it could provide? You took the idea to the council. They listened, their faces thoughtful in the lamplight of Eric's chamber. "We store food down here," you began. "We hide tools. We keep history. But we only take from above. What if we grew something down here? Not carrots and sand, but something that likes the dark." Ulrich the tanner, the man of processes, leaned forward. "Mushrooms," he said simply. "In the deep forests, they grow on rotten logs, in the cool and the damp. No sun needed." It was a spark. They remembered the compost pit, quietly transforming waste in the dark. That was decomposition. Could they guide it towards creation? An expedition was formed. You, your father, Ulrich, and Greta went into the deepest, oldest part of the nearby forest, where the trees were giants and the light was a filtered green gloom. They looked not for trees, but for fallen ones. They found a great oak, brought down by lightning years before, its trunk softened to a spongy richness. On its underside grew clusters of oyster mushrooms, pale and fan-shaped. Carefully, they cut sections of the rotting wood, thick with the white, thread-like mycelium that was the true body of the fungus. Back in the network, in a disused, perpetually damp corner of the tanner's chamber, they built a bed. They layered the inoculated wood, kept it moist with water from the sump, and covered it with a cloth of woven reeds to hold the humidity. It was an experiment, a gesture of faith in the generative dark. While the mushroom bed was a hope for the future, another project addressed a more immediate need: knowledge itself. Your bark map was invaluable, but it was fragile. The history on the walls was safer, but could be lost to a collapse. The council decided the network needed its own archive, a secure repository of its own wisdom. They chose the most stable, driest chamber, the small, hidden room behind the false wall in what was now your family's complex. There, they began to assemble the stone book. Not a book of pages, but of objects. The ancient brooch was placed in a small niche. The charred bowl, the flint arrowheads and bone needle, a rubbing you made of the Frid inscription on a piece of thin leather, a small pot containing a sample of each type of clay from different chambers, a tally stick marked with the signals, 3 notches, a space, 3 notches, a space, 2 notches, and 1. It was a library of things, of examples. If a future keeper found this room, they would have a primer. This is how we signaled. This is the clay that holds best. These are the people who came before. The most profound addition was the first page of the Earth Covenant itself. Unable to write it, they symbolized it. Otto contributed a smooth river stone. Your father gave a twisted straw from the daub mix. Henrik offered a small iron nail from the tool cache. Ulrich gave a chip of tanned leather. Klaus brought a dried bean from the first post-raid harvest. You placed a tiny, fired clay tablet on which Greta had scratched the network's cross-section. Each item represented a family, a principle, a contribution. Together in the niche, they were the covenant made solid. Summer wore on. The mushroom bed, to everyone's astonishment, produced first a white fuzz, then tiny pins, then proper edible oyster mushrooms, pale and delicate in the lamplight. They harvested them sparingly, in awe. They had not just stored food from the sun. They had coaxed food from the rot, from the cool, blind patience of the earth itself. It was a miracle on a plate, a taste of the network's potential. The success of the mushrooms sparked other ideas. Could they keep certain herbs that liked cool, dry darkness? Could they use the steady temperature for fermenting ale or storing cheeses even better? The network was shifting in their minds from a cellar to a larder, from a panic room to a root cellar of innovation. On the day of the Harvest Festival, the mood was profoundly different from the anxious relief of the year before. There was a new confidence, a sense of depth. After the dancing and the feasting, Otto stood before the bonfire, his face glowing. "We have weathered much," he said, his voice carrying over the crackle of flames. "We have been saved by our own hands, and by the earth that shelters them. But this year we have done more than endure. We have begun to understand. We have made promises to each other and to the ground beneath us, and we have asked that ground to give us more than shelter. And it has answered." He held up a small basket. In it were a few of the pale, homegrown mushrooms. "From our darkest place," he said, "a new kind of harvest." The villagers cheered, but it was a thoughtful cheer. They were celebrating more than wheat and turnips. They were celebrating a turning point. They were no longer just hiding in the earth. They were learning to live with it, to listen to its possibilities. That night, you went to the stone book chamber. You lit a single lamp and looked at the collection in its niche. The brooch, the bowl, the covenant stone, the clay tablet. You thought of the mushrooms growing silently in the dark, of Greta's drawings, of the sun chimneys, of the rushing sound of a cleared drain. The network had been a seed of desperation, planted in fear. Nurtured by hardship and cunning, it had grown into a stone of resilience. And now it was putting out a new green shoot, a shoot not just of survival but of a quiet, deliberate underground flourishing. The story was no longer about what they were hiding from. It was about what they were slowly, patiently learning to grow. The second anniversary of the raid passed unmarked by any bell. It was just another autumn day, crisp and golden, the village humming with the last urgent labors before winter's lock. But you felt the date in your bones, a silent turning of a page. You were 14 now, no longer a child learning secrets, but the keeper who held them. Your final act as the chronicler of this chapter was not one of crisis or innovation, but of quiet integration. The network was no longer a separate, secret thing. It was the village's second heartbeat, steady and sure beneath the frantic pulse of harvest. People moved between the worlds above and below as naturally as breathing. You saw it in small things. Martha, singing softly to a toddling Erda as she sorted dried mushrooms from the underground bed in her sunlit kitchen. Henrik, taking his afternoon rest not in his smoky forge, but in the cool silence of the tool cache chamber, the rhythm of the earth slowing his own. The children playing a game that involved running the full loop of the tunnels, their laughter a distant, echoing music you now welcomed, not feared. Your own rounds had changed. You still walked the walls, but you were rarely alone. Often, Greta was with you, her sharp eyes now as trained as yours. Sometimes, Friedrich Gruber would join, asking careful questions about beam stress or drainage angles. You were teaching, as Gerd had taught you, but you were also learning to delegate. The covenant meant the knowledge couldn't reside in one person. It had to be a shared well. One afternoon, deep in the oldest tunnel, you and Greta made one last discovery. You were checking a section of wall that had always felt subtly different, cooler, with a faint, almost metallic smell. As you ran your hands over it, a section of clay, loosened by the endless cycles of damp and dry, crumbled away at your touch. Behind it was not more earth, but stone. A flat, worked stone, set into the hill's bedrock. And carved into its surface was a single, powerful symbol. A spiral. It was not a tally, not a name, not a picture. It was an idea. A symbol of journey, of depth, of things turning back on themselves yet moving forward. It was older than the brooch, older than Frid's scratchings. It was a message from the first people who had ever understood this hill. From an age so distant it made the wooden bowl seem modern. You didn't excavate it. You left it hidden, resealing the clay over it with reverence. Some secrets were meant to be felt, not owned. The spiral was the network's true founding stone, a reminder that their work was part of a human impulse, as old as fear and as enduring as hope. The true harvest was in, the stores were full above and below. On a clear, cold evening, with the first hard frost glittering on the fields, the council gathered for the last time before the winter quiet. But it wasn't in a chamber. It was in your family's house, by the hearth, the map of the network laid out on the table like a shared dream. Otto looked around at the faces, your father, Eric, Ulrich, Klaus, Henrik, and you. "We began as frightened men digging holes," he said, his voice low and sure. "We became a council of Earth. Now, I think we are simply a village that knows where its roots are." There were nods. No grand speeches were needed. The work spoke for itself. After they left, your father remained by the fire. He looked at you for a long time. Then he went to the hearth and took a small, flat stone that had been heating in the embers. He wrapped it in a rag and handed it to you, along with a pointed nail. "It's time," he said. You knew what he meant. You took the warm stone and the nail, and you went down into the heart of the network to your family's chamber. By the light of a single, steady lamp, you stood before the wall of handprints. Your grandfathers, your great-grandfathers, generations of keepers and diggers, their palms pressed into eternity. You placed the warm stone against the clay, letting its heat soften the surface just enough. Then, with care that bordered on ceremony, you pressed your own right hand firmly into the earth beside the oldest print. You held it there, feeling the cool clay give and then hold. When you pulled away, the perfect, clear impression of your hand remained, smaller than the men's, but with a strength of its own. Then, taking the nail, you carved below it. Not a symbol from your lexicon, just 2 words, in the clumsy letters you had painstakingly learned from Father Bernard in exchange for mending his vestments. You carved, Agnes, keeper. It was done. You were no longer just learning the story. You were in it. Your mark was now part of the wall, part of the memory, part of the deep, slow conversation between your people and the earth. You stepped back and looked. Your fresh print, the ancient ones, the word keeper underneath. A lineage, promise, a belonging. You doused the lamp and made your way back to the surface in the perfect, comforting dark, guided by touch and memory. You emerged into a night frosted with stars. The village asleep, the world hushed. The winter would come with its cold and its silence. But beneath the frozen ground, the chambers waited, full of food, of tools, of history, of slowly growing mushrooms. The network was sleeping, but it was alive, and you were its keeper. You walked home, your hands still tingling with the memory of the clay. The story wasn't over. It would never be over. There would be new winters, new challenges, new children to teach, new marks to make on the wall. But this chapter, the chapter of fear turning to wisdom, of holes in the ground becoming a home, this chapter was complete. You had learned the Earth's most vital secret, that 3 feet down, the temperature holds steady. But you had learned a greater one, that in the steady, dark patience of community, hope does too. And that, my friends, is the story of Agnes and the underground village. From a terrified girl in a frozen house to the keeper of a living legacy. This wasn't just about hiding. It was about building a future in the dark. If you've been on this journey with us, you know that the most incredible histories aren't always about kings and battles. They're about the quiet, stubborn genius of ordinary people. If this tale of grit and earth resonated with you, do us a solid, smash that like button, and subscribe if you haven't already. It lets us know to keep digging up more forgotten stories like this one. We're halfway through our time together, and I've got to ask, what part of Agnes's journey stuck with you the most? Was it the discovery of the Earth's steady temperature? The birth of Erda in the blizzard? The clever trick they played on the Grey Pilgrim? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. Remember, history isn't just in castles. It's in the dirt beneath our feet. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep your eyes open and maybe check what's under your own floorboards. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you like the video.